The kitchen smelled like failure. Not the sharp tang of burnt bread or spoiled meat. Those were honest mistakes, fixable things. This was different. This was the smell of a woman who'd spent 3 hours cooking her best dishes, only to watch the restaurant owner's face harden the moment she walked through his door. "I'm sorry," he'd said, though his eyes said he wasn't. "The position's been filled." Mara Holloway had heard that particular lie 17 times in 4 months. She stood now in the boarding house room she could barely afford, staring at the leather apron folded on her narrow bed. James had stitched it for her the winter before he died, his carpenter's hands clumsy with needle and thread but steady with love. The leather was worn soft now, scarred from years of work, darkened by smoke and grease, and the sweat of a woman who'd spent her life proving she belonged in kitchens that didn't want her. Her fingers traced the crooked seam along the pocket. She was 42 years old, a widow, a woman whose body had never fit the shape the world demanded. Too broad, too tall, too much of everything except the delicate beauty that made men comfortable and other women kind. The rejection today had been worse than most. The owner, a thin man with oil-slick hair, hadn't even let her finish speaking. He'd looked her up and down like she was livestock at auction, found her lacking, and turned away before she could mention the hotels she'd cooked for, the private families who'd praised her pastries, the years of experience that should have mattered more than the width of her hips. "We need someone who can move quickly in a small space," he'd said. Translation: "You're too fat for my kitchen." Mara had walked out with her spine straight and her face calm. She'd learned long ago not to give people the satisfaction of her tears. But now, alone in a room that cost more than she had left, the weight of it all pressed down like a physical thing. She was running out of money, running out of options, running out of the stubborn hope that had kept her moving forward since James died. The newspaper sat on the table, folded to the employment section. She'd circled 3 possibilities that morning. 2 had already turned her away. The third was, her eyes found it again, cook wanted. Frontier ranch, mountain territory, room and board provided, experience with large households required. Inquire, G. Mercer, general delivery, Stillwater. She'd almost skipped it. Ranch work meant isolation, hard country, and the kind of people who expected miracles from salt pork and dried beans. But it also meant room and board. It meant a job that wouldn't be filled by the time she arrived. And it meant leaving this town where everyone knew she was the fat widow who couldn't find work. Mara read the notice again, slower this time. Large households. That could mean anything. A ranch owner with a big crew, maybe. Hired hands who needed feeding. Or children. Something twisted in her chest. She and James had wanted children, tried for them. But her body, which the world found too abundant in every other way, had been stubbornly barren where it mattered most. She shook off the thought. This wasn't about want. This was about survival. She packed that night a single worn trunk containing 4 dresses, the apron, a small wooden box of James's letters, and the kitchen knife she'd carried since her first job at 16. By dawn, she was on a coach heading into country so remote the driver warned her twice about turning back. "Stillwater's rough territory," he'd said, eyeing her bags. "And the Mercer place is 3 hours beyond that. You sure about this?" Mara wasn't sure about anything except that staying meant starving. "I'm sure," she lied. The journey took 2 days. The landscape grew wilder with each mile, dense forests giving way to rocky foothills, then climbing into mountains that scraped the belly of the sky. The towns grew smaller and farther between until finally there was just wilderness, broken only by the narrow road and the occasional ranch gate. When they finally reached Stillwater, it was barely a town at all. A mercantile, a church, a building that served as both saloon and post office, and maybe 20 scattered houses clinging to the valley floor like barnacles. The postmaster, a narrow man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down when she asked about the Mercer ranch. "You the new cook?" "I am." "Huh." He didn't sound impressed. "Mercer's had 4 quit in 6 months. Place is a mess. Kids are half wild. He's—" The man paused, choosing his words. "He's had a rough time since his wife passed." "How long ago?" "1.5 years, maybe closer to 2 now." Mara felt something shift in her understanding. Not hired hands then. A widower, children, a family broken by grief. "How many children?" she asked. 6. The postmaster shook his head. Oldest is maybe 15, youngest is 5 or 6. Good luck lasting longer than the others. He gave her directions, another 3 hours by wagon if she could hire one, longer on foot. Mara hired the wagon. It cost money she didn't have, but she'd learned that sometimes you had to spend your last coins on the chance of more. The ranch appeared as the sun started its descent, a sprawling, exhausted-looking operation carved into a mountain valley. The main house was large but sagging, its paint peeling, its porch tilting like a drunk. The barn looked sturdy enough, but the fences needed mending, and the yard was cluttered with broken equipment and firewood that should have been stacked months ago. It looked like a place where people were too tired to care anymore. The wagon driver helped her down, took his money, and left without a word. Mara stood alone in the yard, trunk at her feet, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. The front door opened. A girl emerged, maybe 13, with tangled brown hair and a dress that had been let out so many times the seams were more patched than original fabric. She stopped on the porch, arms crossed, and stared at Mara with open hostility. "You're the new cook?" "I am. Mara Holloway. How long you planning to stay?" The question was sharp, testing. Mara met the girl's eyes and saw exhaustion there, buried under anger. "As long as I'm needed," Mara said. "That's what the last one said. She left after 2 weeks." "I'm not her." The girl's jaw tightened. For a moment she looked like she might cry. Then she shook it off, turned, and called back into the house. "Papa, the new one's here!" Heavy footsteps. The door opened wider, and a man stepped out. Gideon Mercer was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 2 years. His hair needed cutting, his beard needed trimming. His eyes, gray and distant, swept over Mara with the same exhausted assessment she'd seen on the postmaster's face. "Miss Holloway? Mr. Mercer? You understand the work? Cook for your household. Clean what needs cleaning? I saw the notice said large household. Your daughter mentioned 6 children?" "That's right." He didn't elaborate, didn't smile, just stood there like a man who'd forgotten how to do anything but survive. "I can manage that," Mara said. "Rooms off the kitchen? Meals with the family, $20 a month plus board." It was less than she'd made in the city, but it included housing and food. It was enough. "Agreed." He nodded once. "Sadie will show you in." The girl, Sadie, grabbed one end of Mara's trunk without asking and dragged it toward the house. Mara took the other end, and together they hauled it up the sagging porch steps. Inside, the house was worse than she'd expected. Not dirty, exactly, but neglected. Dust coated the furniture. Dishes were stacked haphazardly by a dry sink. The floor needed sweeping. The windows needed washing. And everywhere was the heavy presence of absence, as if the house itself was mourning. 3 children sat at the kitchen table, silent and watchful. 2 boys who looked like twins, maybe 10 years old, and a little girl with blonde braids who couldn't have been more than 7. They stared at Mara like she was a ghost. "This is the new cook," Sadie announced flatly. "Don't get attached." Mara set her end of the trunk down carefully and looked at the children. The twins were identical, sharp-featured and wary. The little girl held a rag doll with one arm missing. "What are your names?" Mara asked. The twins glanced at each other. Finally, one spoke. "I'm Samuel, that's Simon. And you?" Mara looked at the little girl. "Lila," she whispered. "It's nice to meet you all." Mara meant it. They didn't believe her. She could see it in their faces, the careful distance, the expectation of disappointment. How many cooks had walked through this door and walked right back out? "Where's your other siblings?" Mara asked Sadie. "Elias is in the barn. Noah's probably hiding somewhere." Sadie's voice was tight. "He doesn't talk. Hasn't since Mama died." The weight of that statement settled over the kitchen. "How old is Noah?" 6. 6 years old and silent for a year and a half. Mara's chest tightened. "And Elias?" 15. He'll give you trouble." Sadie said it like a warning and a dare. "I'll manage," Mara said again. Sadie snorted. "Sure you will." The girl turned and walked out, leaving Mara standing in a kitchen that desperately needed a woman's touch, and children who desperately needed, what? A mother? A cook? Someone who'd stay? Mara didn't know, but she knew how to start. She rolled up her sleeves, tied on James's old apron, and surveyed the kitchen properly. The stove was good, cast iron, well made, just needed cleaning. The pantry was better stocked than she'd expected, though the organization was chaos. Flour, beans, salt pork, dried apples, cornmeal, a precious jar of honey. She could work with this. "Are you hungry?" she asked the three children still sitting at the table. They nodded, silent and synchronized. "When did you last eat?" Samuel and Simon exchanged looks again. Lila studied her doll. "Breakfast," Samuel finally said. Sadie made porridge. It was well past supper time now. Mara felt a flash of anger, not at the children, but at the man who'd let things fall apart this badly. But anger wouldn't feed anyone. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, building a fire in the stove, setting water to boil, pulling out cornmeal and the salt pork. Within 20 minutes, she had cornbread baking and a pot of beans warming on the stove. Nothing fancy, but hot and filling. The children watched her in silence. When she pulled the cornbread from the oven, the smell filled the kitchen, warm, golden, buttery. The twins' noses twitched. Lila's stomach growled audibly. "Go wash up," Mara said, "and find your brothers and your father. Supper's ready." They scattered like startled birds. Mara set the table, mismatched plates, bent forks, but clean. She ladled beans into bowls, sliced the cornbread, poured water from the pump. Footsteps on the porch. The door opened. Gideon came in first, followed by the twins and Lila. Behind them came a teenage boy who had to be Elias. Tall, lanky, with his father's gray eyes and a scowl that could curdle milk. He looked Mara up and down and made no effort to hide his disdain. "You're bigger than the last one," he said. The room went silent. The twins froze. Lila's eyes widened. Even Gideon looked uncomfortable. Mara had heard worse. She'd heard it all her life, every variation of fat, heavy, large, big bone that people could invent to avoid calling her what they meant. She met Elias's eyes calmly. "I imagine I am," she said. "Good thing, too. Smaller women seem to have trouble lasting here." The boy's scowl deepened, but he had no comeback for that. Sadie appeared in the doorway, a small boy tucked against her side. He was tiny, too thin, with dark hair and enormous eyes that took up half his face. He pressed himself against Sadie's leg like he could disappear into her shadow. "Noah." Mara's heart cracked a little. "Sit down, everyone," she said quietly. "Food's getting cold." They sat, Elias with obvious reluctance. Noah climbed into his chair but didn't look at the food. The others waited, uncertain. Gideon cleared his throat. "Go ahead." They ate like starving animals, too fast, too desperate. Even Elias, despite his hostility, demolished his cornbread in 4 bites. Noah ate slowly, mechanically, his eyes on his plate. Mara served seconds without comment. When the boys reached for thirds, she refilled their bowls. When everyone had finally slowed down, bellies full for maybe the first time in weeks, Gideon spoke. "That was good. Thank you." It was the first time he'd looked directly at her. "You're welcome," Mara said. Elias shoved back from the table. "I've got work in the barn." "It's dark," Gideon said. "So?" "So it can wait until morning." Father and son stared at each other across the table, some old argument playing out in silence. Finally, Elias turned and stalked out the back door, letting it slam behind him. Gideon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I'll clean up," Sadie said quickly, already gathering plates. "I can help," Mara started. "I've got it." The girl's voice was sharp, defensive. This was her territory, and she wasn't ready to share it. Mara nodded and stepped back. One by one, the children disappeared, the twins to some mysterious task upstairs, Lila to a corner with her broken doll. Sadie scrubbed dishes with furious efficiency. Gideon stood by the window staring out at nothing. And Noah stayed in his chair, small and silent, watching Mara with those enormous eyes. She didn't approach him, didn't speak to him, just moved around the kitchen, wiping down the table, sweeping the floor, letting him get used to her presence. When she hung the dish towel to dry, she felt a small hand brush against her apron. She looked down. Noah stood beside her, so close she could feel his small body trembling. He didn't speak, didn't look up, just pressed himself against the leather apron like it was armor. Mara's breath caught. Slowly, carefully, she rested one hand on his thin shoulder. He didn't pull away. They stood like that for a long moment. A woman who'd spent her life being told she was too much, and a boy who'd lost his voice to grief, finding something like safety in each other's silence. Noah. Gideon's voice was rough. Bedtime. The boy pulled away immediately, disappearing up the stairs without a sound. Mara turned to find Gideon staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. He doesn't usually... The man stopped, started again. He doesn't touch people. Not since... I understand, Mara said quietly. Gideon nodded once, then followed his son upstairs. The house settled into nighttime quiet. Mara found her room, barely more than a closet off the kitchen, with a narrow bed and a single shelf. She unpacked her trunk, hung the apron on a nail by the door, and lay down on the thin mattress. She'd made it through one day. Tomorrow she'd see if she could make it through another. Ugh. The screaming woke her. Mara jerked upright, heart hammering, disoriented in the darkness. For a moment she thought she was back in the boarding house, back in the city. Then she remembered. The ranch. The children. The screaming came again, high and terrified. She was out of bed and running before she fully registered moving, grabbing the apron purely from instinct as she rushed into the main house. The sound came from upstairs. She took the steps 2 at a time, her weight making the old wood groan. A door stood open, light spilling out. Inside, Gideon knelt beside a small bed where Noah thrashed and screamed, caught in the grip of some nightmare so terrible it had stolen his voice by day but owned him completely at night. It's all right, son. You're safe. You're home. Gideon's voice was desperate, helpless. The other children crowded the doorway. Sadie with her hair loose and tears on her face, the twins wide-eyed and frightened, Lila clutching her doll. Mara pushed through them gently. "Let me try," she said. Gideon looked up, his face raw with pain and exhaustion. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he stepped back. Mara knelt beside the bed. Noah was crying now, still caught in the dream, his small body rigid with terror. She didn't try to wake him, didn't shake him or speak loudly. Instead, she began to hum. It was an old song, something her grandmother had sung when Mara was small and the world felt too big and too cruel. A simple melody, barely more than a handful of notes repeated and varied. She hummed it softly, steadily, and laid her hand gently on Noah's small chest. The boy's screaming stuttered, quieted. His breathing slowed. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Noah's eyes opened. He stared up at Mara, confused and lost. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're home. It was just a dream." Noah's face crumpled, tears spilled over. And then he did something that made Gideon inhale sharply. Noah reached for her. Mara gathered the tiny boy into her arms, leather apron and all, and held him while he cried silently against her shoulder. She kept humming, kept rocking gently, until his breathing evened out and his small body went heavy with exhausted sleep. She lowered him back to the bed carefully, pulled the blanket up to his chin. When she turned, the entire family was staring at her. Gideon's face had gone pale. Sadie had one hand pressed to her mouth. Even Elias stood in the doorway, his hostility temporarily forgotten. "He hasn't let anyone hold him," Gideon said hoarsely. "Not since—" He couldn't finish. Mara stood slowly, her knees protesting. "He's asleep now." "How did you—" Sadie started. "Sometimes people just need to know they're not alone in the dark," Mara said simply. She moved toward the door. The children parted for her. As she passed Elias, their eyes met. His scowl was gone. In its place was something uncertain, young, afraid. Mara paused. "Get some sleep, all of you." She made her way back downstairs, her heart still racing, and returned to her small room. She didn't sleep again that night. But when dawn finally broke and she rose to start the day's work, she found something waiting on the kitchen table that hadn't been there before. A cup of coffee, still hot. And sitting beside it, silent as a ghost, was Sadie. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands were clenched in her lap. "Mama used to hum that song," she whispered. Mara's throat tightened. "Did she?" Sadie nodded. "I'd forgotten. I forgot what it sounded like." "I'm sorry," Mara said, unsure if she was apologizing for remembering or for making the girl remember. Sadie shook her head fiercely. "Don't be. It's—" Her voice cracked. "It's good to remember, sometimes." Mara sat down across from her, wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "Thank you for this." You helped Noah. I did what I could. That's more than anyone else has done. Sadie's jaw worked. The last cook wouldn't even come upstairs when he screamed, said it wasn't her job to deal with broken children. Mara felt rage flash through her, hot and bright. He's not broken, she said quietly. He's grieving. There's a difference. Sadie's eyes filled with tears. Everyone says we need to move on. Get over it. Act normal again. Everyone's wrong. The girl looked up sharply. Mara met her gaze steadily. Grief doesn't have a schedule. You move through it at your own pace. Anyone who tells you different doesn't understand what it means to lose someone you love. Sadie's face crumpled. For a moment, Mara thought she might cry. Instead, the girl stood abruptly. I should help with breakfast. You should, Mara agreed. But first, you should sit here and drink your coffee and breathe. There's too much work. The work will wait. Papa says, I don't care what your papa says right now. Sit, breathe. Sadie sank back into her chair like someone had cut her strings. They sat together in the quiet kitchen as dawn light crept across the floor. Two women, one barely more than a child, one who'd never been allowed to be one, learning how to exist in the space between grief and mourning. Finally, Sadie spoke. Will you stay? Mara thought about the boarding house room she couldn't afford, the kitchens that didn't want her, the life she'd left behind that had never really wanted her in the first place. She thought about Noah's small hand against her apron, the twins watching her cook with hungry eyes that wanted more than food, Lila's broken doll, Elias's anger that was just fear wearing different clothes, and Sadie, this girl who'd been forced to become a mother when she should still have had one. Yes, Mara said. I'll stay. Sadie nodded once, quick and hard, like she was sealing a contract. Then she stood and started pulling out ingredients for breakfast, and together they began the day's work. By the time the rest of the family stumbled downstairs, the kitchen smelled like bacon and fresh biscuits. The table was set. The coffee was hot. The children ate quickly, still half asleep. Gideon appeared last, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes found Mara's across the kitchen. Thank you, he said quietly, for last night. It's what I'm here for. That's not... He stopped. No one's done that before. Helped with Noah, I mean. Then the people before me were fools, Mara said bluntly. The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest she'd seen. Then Elias walked in, and the almost smile disappeared. The boy grabbed a biscuit and headed for the door. Sit down and eat properly, Gideon said. I'm eating. At the table. With your family. Why? So we can pretend everything's fine? Elias's voice was sharp with bitterness. So we can sit here and act like having another stranger in Mama's kitchen makes anything better? The air went cold. Elias, Gideon's voice carried a warning. What? It's true. She'll leave just like the others. They all do. That's enough. Why? Because you don't want to hear it? Because you want to keep pretending? I said that's enough! Gideon's hand slammed down on the table. The children flinched. Noah went rigid. Sadie's face drained of color. Elias stared at his father with something like hatred, then turned and walked out. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Gideon stood there, breathing hard, his fist still pressed against the table. Then, without a word, he followed his son out. The kitchen was silent, except for the tick of the clock on the wall. Mara looked at the remaining children, all of them frozen, barely breathing, waiting to see if the world would explode again. Finish your breakfast, she said calmly. Then, Samuel and Simon, I need firewood split. Sadie, we'll do the washing. Lila, you can help me in the garden. Normal tasks, normal routines, something to hold on to when everything felt like it was fracturing. The children moved mechanically through the meal, then scattered to their assigned tasks. Mara stood alone in the kitchen and wondered what kind of hell she'd actually walked into. She found out that afternoon. A wagon rolled up the drive, polished, expensive, pulled by matched horses that had never known a hard day's work. The woman who stepped down was everything Mara wasn't. Delicate, pale, dressed in clothes that cost more than Mara had earned in a year. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were cold as winter. She swept up to the house like she owned it. Mara met her at the door, dish towel still in hand. Can I help you? The woman's gaze traveled over Mara slowly, taking in every inch, every pound, every imperfection. "You must be the new cook." Her voice was honey over glass. "I'm Lenora Crow. I've come to call on Mr. Mercer." Something in the way she said it made Mara's skin crawl. "Mr. Mercer's working. I can give him a message." "Oh, that won't be necessary. I'll wait." Lenora moved past her without invitation, into the house, her eyes cataloging everything. The dust Mara hadn't had time to clean, the worn furniture, the children's scattered belongings. "What a shame," Lenora murmured. "This house used to be so lovely when Elizabeth was alive." Elizabeth. The wife, the mother, the ghost that lived in every corner of this place. "I'm sure it was," Mara said carefully. "Such a tragedy. Poor Gideon was absolutely destroyed, and the children—" Lenora shook her head sadly. "Well, they've clearly suffered. They're managing." "Are they?" Lenora's smile sharpened. "I've heard differently. I've heard Elias is running wild. That little Noah still hasn't spoken. That Gideon can barely keep the ranch running." "Where did you hear that?" "Oh, everyone knows. It's a small valley. People talk." Lenora's eyes glittered. "Especially when a widower hires yet another woman to live in his house." The implication hung in the air like poison. Mara felt her spine stiffen. "I'm the cook, that's all." "Of course you are, dear." Lenora's tone said she believed nothing of the kind. "I'm sure your intentions are entirely proper. It's just, well, appearances matter. And a woman of your stature, living alone with a man like Gideon, people will talk." There it was, the knife sliding between the ribs. A woman of your stature. Mara had spent 42 years learning to recognize that particular blade. "Let them talk," she said flatly. Lenora's eyebrows rose. How bold. Though I suppose when one has nothing to lose, boldness comes easily. Before Mara could respond, the door opened. Gideon walked in, saw Lenora, and his entire body went rigid. "Mrs. Crow." "Gideon, I was just getting acquainted with your new cook." Lenora's smile was radiant, fake. "She's quite different from the others." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Was there something you needed?" "My husband and I wanted to extend an invitation. We're hosting a dinner next week, just neighbors, nothing formal. We'd love to have you and the children attend." "That's kind, but you can't hide out here forever, Gideon." Lenora's voice softened, turned sympathetic. "Elizabeth wouldn't want that. She'd want you to rejoin the community, to let people help." Mara watched Gideon's face change. Pain, guilt, anger, all fighting for dominance. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Wonderful. I'll send a formal invitation." Lenora swept toward the door, paused. "Oh, and do bring your cook if you like. I'm sure everyone would be fascinated to meet her." She left in a cloud of expensive perfume and malice. Gideon stood in the doorway, staring after the wagon. "Who is she?" Mara asked quietly. "The rancher's wife from the next valley over. She and her husband have been—" He stopped. "They've been trying to buy my land. And you don't want to sell. This is my children's inheritance. I'm not selling." "Then why does she keep coming around?" Gideon's face darkened. "Because Silas Crow doesn't take no for an answer. He'll keep pushing until he finds a way to make me leave." "And his wife?" "Handles the things he can't do with money or threats." Gideon finally looked at Mara. "She'll make life difficult for you, for all of us." "I'm used to difficult," Mara said. "Not like this. Lenora Crow is—" He struggled for words. "She destroys people with whispers. By the time you realize what's happening, your reputation's already gone." "Good thing I don't have a reputation to lose." Gideon almost smiled at that. "You will, after today. She'll make sure of it." "Let her try." They stood there in the quiet house, two people who'd both lost too much to be afraid of small-town gossip. Then Gideon said something that made Mara's blood run cold. "It's not just talk I'm worried about." His voice dropped. "Crow's had his eye on this land for years. Ever since Elizabeth—" He stopped. "I think he's been waiting for me to fail. For the ranch to fall apart so completely, I'd have no choice but to sell." "What makes you think that?" "Because things keep going wrong. Fences cut, cattle scattered, tools going missing." Gideon's eyes were hard. "Things that could be accidents, or could be something else." "Sabotage." "I can't prove it." He looked out the window toward the distant mountains. Something's coming. I can feel it. What do you mean? Gideon's hands clenched into fists. Last night, someone was on the property. I found tracks by the north fence line this morning. Boot prints, horse tracks. Someone's been watching the house. A chill ran down Mara's spine. Did you tell the sheriff? Stillwater doesn't have a real sheriff, just a deputy who works for whoever pays him most. And right now, that's Silas Crow. Mara stared at him. So we're alone out here. We always have been. Outside, clouds were gathering over the mountains, dark, heavy, promising storms. Gideon looked at Mara with something like regret in his eyes. You should leave, he said quietly. Before this gets worse, I'll pay you for the week and give you enough for the coach back. No. Miss Holloway. I said no. Mara's voice was steady. I told your daughter I'd stay. I told your son he was safe. I don't break my word. You don't understand what you're walking into. Then explain it to me. Gideon ran a hand through his hair, exhausted and desperate. Crow wants this land. He'll do whatever it takes to get it. And if that means making life unbearable for everyone on this ranch until I give in, he'll do it. He's already started. Then we fight back. With what? I've got 6 children, a failing ranch, and a town that's too scared of Crow to help. You've got me now too. Gideon looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You're a cook. I'm a woman who spent 42 years refusing to disappear just because the world wants me to. I'm not starting now. Something shifted in Gideon's expression, surprise maybe, or the faintest flicker of hope. Before he could respond, the door burst open. Elias stood there, breathing hard, his face white with fear. Papa, you need to come. Now. They ran. All 3 of them, Gideon, Elias, and Mara, racing toward the north pasture where black smoke was rising into the afternoon sky. The fence was burning, not the whole thing, just a section, but enough. And beyond it, scattered across the hillside, were Gideon's cattle, running loose, panicked by the smoke and noise. Damn it! Gideon was already moving, shouting orders. Elias, get the horses. We need to round them up before they reach the ravine. What about the fire? Mara shouted. Let it burn. We can rebuild fence. We can't replace the herd. The next hour was chaos. Mara helped where she could, fetching water, holding horses, keeping the younger children back from danger. She watched Gideon and Elias work together with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this 100 times, driving the scattered cattle back toward the ranch. By the time they'd recovered most of the herd, the fence had burned itself out, leaving nothing but charred posts and ash. Gideon stood staring at the damage, his face like stone. Accident? Mara asked quietly. No. He pointed to the base of one blackened post. See that? The burn pattern. Someone started this, deliberately. Mara felt cold despite the heat radiating from the smoldering fence. This is a warning, Gideon said. Crow's telling me he can hurt me whenever he wants, that I'm not safe, that my children aren't safe. What are you going to do? For a long moment, Gideon didn't answer. Then he turned and looked at his ranch, at the house where his children waited, at the land he'd built with his own hands, at everything he'd promised his dying wife he'd protect. I'm going to fight, he said quietly. And Mara, standing beside him in her ash-stained apron, looking at the burned fence and the frightened cattle and the mountains that held both beauty and threat, made a decision of her own. Then so am I. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming, and neither of them was running anymore. The rain came that night, hard and cold, turning the ash from the burned fence into black mud that stained everything it touched. Mara stood at the kitchen window watching water pour off the sagging porch roof, listening to the house creak and settle around her. Behind her, Gideon sat at the table with a ledger open, running numbers that clearly weren't adding up the way he needed them to. His jaw was tight, his shoulders hunched with the weight of calculations that kept coming up short. How bad is it? Mara asked without turning around. Bad enough. He didn't look up. Lost 3 head in the scramble today. 1 broke a leg in the ravine, had to put her down. The other 2 are just gone, probably ran themselves to death or fell somewhere I haven't found yet. And the fence? 100 feet of line needs replacing. Posts, wire, labor. He rubbed his face. Money I don't have. Mara turned from the window. What about the other ranchers? Would they help? Gideon's laugh was bitter. The ones who aren't already in Crow's pocket are too scared to cross him. Nobody wants to be next. So we do it ourselves. We? He finally looked at her. Miss Holloway, you've been here 3 days. This isn't your fight. I'm here, aren't I? That makes it my fight, too. You don't understand what you're saying. Crow doesn't just make things difficult. He destroys people. Their land, their reputation, their livelihood, everything. Then he'll have to destroy me, too. Mara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. I've got nothing left to lose except my word. And I gave that to your children. Gideon stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gray eyes. Finally, he shook his head. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Mara said. Now show me those numbers. Maybe there's something you're missing. They worked until past midnight, going over every expense, every asset, every possible way to stretch what little money remained. It wasn't enough. Even with careful planning, the ranch was bleeding resources faster than it could recover. What about selling off some of the herd, Mara suggested. Can't. Not until fall, and even then the prices will be terrible. Crow's got arrangements with most of the buyers. He'll make sure I get bottom dollar for anything I try to sell. The land then, not all of it, just... No. Gideon's voice went hard. I sell one piece and Crow will use it as leverage for the rest. He's been waiting for me to get desperate enough to make that mistake. Mara sat back, frustrated. Every option led to the same dead end. Silas Crow. There has to be something, she muttered. If there is, I haven't found it in 18 months. The defeat in his voice made something fierce rise up in Mara's chest. She'd heard that tone before, in her own voice. In the months after James died, when every door closed and every opportunity vanished. The sound of a person giving up. No, she said firmly. No what? No, you don't get to quit. Not with 6 children depending on you. Gideon's eyes flashed. You think I'm quitting? I've been fighting to keep this place running since the day Elizabeth died. I've worked myself half to death trying to hold everything together. Then keep fighting, but stop fighting alone. I told you, there's no one. There's me. Mara leaned forward. And there's your children. And somewhere in this valley, there have to be other people who are tired of Crow controlling everything. You don't know these people. Then introduce me. Gideon opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. Why? He asked finally. Why do you care this much? Mara thought about the boarding house room she'd escaped. The kitchen owners who'd looked at her body and decided she wasn't worth the trouble. The lifetime of being told to make herself smaller, quieter, less. Because I'm tired of people like Crow deciding who gets to exist and who doesn't, she said. Because your children deserve better than watching their father get crushed by a bully. And because... She stopped, surprised by the truth that wanted to come out. Because this is the first place in a long time that's felt like it could be home. The kitchen was quiet except for the rain hammering the roof. Gideon's throat worked. Home, he repeated softly, like the word hurt. Before Mara could respond, footsteps creaked overhead, then down the stairs. Sadie appeared in the doorway, her nightgown ghostly in the lamplight, her face streaked with tears. I can't sleep, she whispered. Mara rose immediately. Bad dreams? No, I just... The girl's voice cracked. I keep thinking about the fence, about someone watching us, about what happens if they come back. Gideon started to stand, but Mara caught his eye and shook her head slightly. She moved to Sadie, guided her to the table, wrapped a blanket around her thin shoulders. Your father's here, Mara said quietly, and I'm here. You're safe. But for how long? Sadie's eyes were too old, too afraid. How long before something worse happens? It was the question they were all thinking. Gideon's face had gone pale. Mara pulled her chair close to Sadie's. I don't know, she said honestly. I can't promise nothing bad will happen. But I can promise we'll face it together. The others all left. I'm not them. You say that now, and I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until you believe me. Mara took the girl's cold hands in her own. I know what it's like to be abandoned, Sadie. I know what it feels like to watch people walk away when things get hard. I won't do that to you. Sadie's face crumpled. I'm so tired of being scared. I know, sweetheart. I know. The girl collapsed against Mara's shoulder, sobbing with the kind of exhaustion that came from holding everything together for too long. Mara held her, rocking slightly, making the same humming sound that had soothed Noah. Over Sadie's head, her eyes met Gideon's. He was staring at them with an expression that looked like grief and gratitude tangled together. His hands were clenched on the table, knuckles white. When Sadie's tears finally slowed, Mara helped her back upstairs, tucked her into bed beside a sleeping Lila, and waited until the girl's breathing evened out. Downstairs, Gideon was still sitting at the table. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "She needed someone. She needed her mother." The words came out raw. "They all do. And I don't know how to be both." Mara sat down again, bone-tired but unable to leave him alone with that pain. "You're not supposed to be both," she said gently. "You're supposed to be their father. That's enough." "It hasn't been. Not since Elizabeth died. I failed them in every way that matters." "That's grief talking, not truth." "Is it?" Gideon's voice rose slightly. "Look around, Miss Holloway. This house is falling apart. My children are terrified. My son won't speak to me. My daughter has nightmares. And I can't even keep them safe from a man who wants to steal everything we have left. So we change that." "How? Tell me how, because I've been trying." "By stopping this." Mara's voice was sharp enough to cut through his spiral. "This guilt, this self-flagellation. Your children don't need a perfect father. They need one who's present, who fights for them, who doesn't give up." Gideon stared at her. "You don't pull your punches, do you?" "I've never had the luxury." Mara softened her tone. "Look, I don't know what Elizabeth was like. I'm sure she was wonderful, but she's gone, and you're still here. And those children upstairs need you to stop drowning in what you've lost and start fighting for what you still have." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's the hardest thing in the world. But it's necessary." Gideon was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Elizabeth would have liked you." The words hit Mara harder than she expected. "You can't know that." "I can. She had no patience for weakness either. Or self-pity." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She would have told me the same thing you just did, probably with more colorful language." "Smart woman." "She was." The smile faded. "She died bringing Noah into the world, bled out before the midwife could stop it. I held her hand and watched her leave, and there was nothing I could do to save her." Mara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." The last thing she said was take care of them, not herself. Them. Gideon's voice broke. "And I haven't. I've let this place fall apart, let Crow terrorize us, let my children suffer because I couldn't face the world without her. But you're facing it now. Am I? Or am I just failing slower? You're here. You're fighting. That's not failing. It doesn't feel like fighting. It feels like drowning." Mara understood that feeling too well. "Then let someone throw you a rope." "Why would you? You barely know us." "Because I know what it's like to drown alone." Mara's voice was quiet but steady. "And I know how much it matters when someone decides you're worth saving." Gideon looked at her then, really looked. Not the quick assessments he'd made before, but a long, searching gaze that took in her scarred hands and too large frame and the stubborn set of her jaw that said she'd been fighting her own battles long before she arrived here. "Who saved you?" he asked. "My husband, James." The name still hurt to say. "He loved me when everyone else taught me I was unlovable. He died 3 years ago, and I've been—" She stopped, surprised by the admission, trying to escape. "I've been looking for a reason to keep going ever since." "And you found it here? In a broken ranch and a broken family?" "Maybe. Or maybe you're all less broken than you think." The rain had slowed to a steady patter. Dawn was still hours away, but Mara could feel exhaustion pulling at her bones. "We should sleep," she said, standing. "Tomorrow we start figuring out how to fight back." "Miss Holloway," "Mara," she corrected, "if we're going to war together, you should probably use my given name." A real smile, small but genuine, touched Gideon's face. "Mara, then. And I'm Gideon." "I know. Thank you. For tonight, for Sadie, for—" He struggled for words. "For staying." Mara nodded and retreated to her small room, where she lay awake until sunrise, listening to the house breathe and wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into. The answer came 3 days later in the form of Lenora Crow's dinner invitation. It arrived by courier, a boy from town who handed Gideon the cream-colored envelope and left without making eye contact. Inside, written in perfect script, was an invitation to dinner at the Crow estate the following Saturday. Gideon read it twice, then set it on the kitchen table like it might explode. "You're not going," Elias said immediately. "I have to." "Why? So Crow can humiliate you in front of everyone?" "So I can show him I'm not hiding, that I'm not afraid."
"But you are afraid," Sadie said quietly. "We all are." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Which is exactly why I need to go. Fear is what Crow wants. It's how he wins." "Then I'm coming with you," Elias said. "No." "Papa." I said no. You're needed here. All of you stay with Mara. Every eye in the kitchen turned to her. "I'm going too," Mara said calmly. Gideon shook his head. "That's not necessary. The invitation included me, didn't it? Lenora said to bring the cook."
"She said that to make trouble." "Then let's give her what she wants." Mara met his gaze steadily. "You said it yourself, we can't keep hiding, so we go together. We show them we're not ashamed of this household or anyone in it. Mara, you don't know what you're walking into. Lenora will tear you apart in front of everyone. Let her try. She'll make comments about your—" Gideon stopped, uncomfortable. "My size? My body? My place here?" Mara's voice was hard. "I've heard worse from better people. I can handle Lenora Crow." "It's not just her. It'll be the whole town, everyone judging, whispering, making assumptions. About what? That a widower hired a cook? That a woman is doing her job?" "About us," Gideon said bluntly. "About what it means for you to be living here. They'll assume—" "I don't care what they assume." Mara's chin came up. "Do you?" The question hung in the air. Gideon looked at her for a long moment, then at his children, watching them both with wide, anxious eyes. "No," he said finally. "I don't." "Then we go. Together. And we show them exactly who we are. A household trying to survive. Nothing more, nothing less." Elias made a disgusted sound. "This is a mistake." "Probably," Gideon agreed. "But we're out of good options." The days leading up to the dinner were tense. Mara worked from dawn to dusk, trying to keep the household running while Gideon and Elias repaired the burned fence. The younger children were quieter than usual, sensing the adults' anxiety. Only Noah seemed unchanged. He followed Mara through her daily tasks, a silent shadow that pressed against her apron whenever she paused. She'd started leaving small tasks for him, stirring a pot, folding dish towels, collecting eggs from the henhouse. He did them all without speaking, but his eyes had started to lose some of their haunted emptiness. On Thursday, 2 days before the dinner, Sadie cornered Mara in the pantry. "What are you going to wear?" Mara looked down at her worn work dress. "This, I suppose." "You can't wear that to the Crows. Lenora will destroy you." "I don't have anything else." Sadie's face set with determination. "Come with me." She led Mara upstairs to a room Mara hadn't entered before, the master bedroom, clearly unused since Elizabeth's death. Dust covered everything. The bed was made but untouched, and in the corner stood a large wardrobe. "Sadie, I don't think—" "Mama would want someone to use them." Sadie opened the wardrobe, revealing rows of dresses. "She was tall like you. Not—" The girl stopped, choosing her words carefully. "Not the same size, but taller than most women. The dresses might work." Mara stared at the clothes, simple but well made, the wardrobe of a practical woman who'd had limited resources but knew how to make the most of them. "I can't wear your mother's things." "Why not? They're just sitting here, and Mama hated waste." Sadie pulled out a dark blue dress with a high collar and simple cut. "Try this one." It felt wrong, invasive, like stepping into a dead woman's skin. But Sadie was looking at her with such desperate hope that Mara couldn't refuse. The dress was too tight in the shoulders and bust, too loose in the waist, too short in the sleeves. But with some quick alterations, letting out seams here, taking in fabric there, it could work. "We'll fix it," Sadie said, already pulling out her sewing kit. "I know how to alter clothes. I've been doing it for the younger ones for years." They worked together over the next 2 days, Sadie's quick fingers adjusting the dress while Mara handled the daily cooking and cleaning. The girl had skill with the needle, making adjustments that were nearly invisible.
Your mother taught you? Mara asked as she watched Sadie work.
She taught me everything: sewing, cooking, keeping house. Sadie's voice was quiet. She said a woman needed to know how to take care of herself and her family, that we couldn't always rely on having money or help. She sounds like she was practical. She was. Papa says I'm like her. Sadie paused in her stitching. But I don't feel like her. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. You're 13 years old. You shouldn't have to be anyone but yourself.
But who is that?
The girl's voice cracked. I don't even remember who I was before Mama died. All I know now is cooking and cleaning and taking care of everyone. Mara set down the potato she'd been peeling and moved to sit beside Sadie. You're the girl who makes sure her siblings eat properly, she said quietly, who stays up late sewing so they have clothes that fit, who holds her father together when he's falling apart. That's not pretending. That's being exactly who you need to be. But I don't want to be that person forever. You won't be. Someday you'll get to be just Sadie again. Not the substitute mother, not the household manager, just a girl figuring out her own life. When? I don't know, but not today, and that's all right. Sadie's eyes filled with tears. I miss her so much. I know, and I hate that I'm forgetting things. Her voice, the way she smelled, the songs she used to sing. The words tumbled out faster. Sometimes I can't remember her face unless I'm looking at the photograph, and that terrifies me because what if I forget her completely? You won't, Mara said firmly. Memory doesn't work like that. She's in everything you do, every stitch you sew, every meal you cook, every time you take care of your siblings. That's her legacy living through you.
Is that how it was with your husband? The question caught Mara off guard. Yes, she said finally. I see James in the way I hold a knife, the songs I hum while I work, the fact that I refuse to make excuses for taking up space in the world. He taught me that. Do you still miss him? Every day. Does it get easier?
Mara thought about that. It gets different. The sharp pain becomes a dull ache. You learn to carry it instead of drowning in it. But easier? I don't know if that's the right word. Sadie nodded slowly, processing this. Then she returned to her sewing with a focus that felt almost meditative. By Saturday morning, the dress was ready. It fit Mara better than anything she'd owned in years. Not perfect, but respectable. When she looked in the small mirror in her room, she barely recognized herself. You look nice, Sadie said from the doorway. I look like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not, Mara said, echoing the girl's earlier words. No, you look like someone who belongs here. Mara wasn't sure about that, but she thanked Sadie anyway. The ride to the Crow estate took an hour. Gideon drove the wagon in uncomfortable silence, wearing what was clearly his only good suit, threadbare at the elbows, but clean. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair, transforming from exhausted rancher to something approaching respectable. You didn't have to come, he said for the third time. Yes, I did, Mara replied for the third time. The Crow house appeared over a rise, a massive structure of painted wood and stone, 3 stories tall with wraparound porches and manicured gardens. It looked like something out of a magazine, completely out of place in the rough mountain territory. This is what our land could buy them, Gideon said quietly. The final piece to connect their holdings. They could control the entire valley. Other wagons were already there, other families arriving in their Sunday best. Mara recognized some faces from town. The mercantile owner, the banker, a few other ranchers. All of them stopped and stared when Gideon helped Mara down from the wagon. The whispers started immediately. Mara lifted her chin and ignored them. Lenora Crow greeted them at the door in a dress that probably cost more than Gideon's entire herd. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were poison. Gideon, how wonderful that you came. And you brought your... She paused delicately. Your cook. Mara Holloway, Mara said, extending her hand. Lenora took it like she was touching something unclean. Of course, do come in. The house was suffocating in its opulence. Thick carpets, crystal chandeliers, furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. Servants moved through the rooms like ghosts, carrying trays of wine and delicate appetizers. Silas Crow held court in the main parlor, a heavy man with cold eyes and a politician's smile. He greeted Gideon with false warmth. Mercer, good to see you out and about.
How are those children of yours? Managing, Gideon said tersely. I'm sure they are, with Miss Holloway's help, of course. Silas's eyes slid over Mara with casual cruelty. Though I imagine feeding 6 growing children requires quite a bit of resources. The implication was clear. Mara ate more than she was worth. Miss Holloway's an excellent cook, Gideon said, his voice tight. The children have never been better fed. I don't doubt it. Silas's smile widened. Though one wonders how long you can afford such luxury. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. Of course, I meant no offense. Silas clapped Gideon on the shoulder. I only mention it because my offer still stands. I'd be happy to take that burden off your hands. Give you enough to start fresh somewhere else, somewhere easier. I'm not interested in selling. Are you sure? Because from what I hear, you're barely holding on. Another bad season, and I said no. The temperature in the room dropped. Other conversations faltered. Everyone was watching now. Silas's smile never wavered. Well, the offer remains open when you change your mind. If, Gideon corrected. When, Silas repeated and turned away. Dinner was an exercise in subtle torture. Mara found herself seated at the far end of the table, separated from Gideon, surrounded by people who made no effort to include her in conversation. When she did speak, her words were met with barely concealed disdain. Lenora, seated at the head of the table like a queen, controlled the flow of discussion with practiced ease. She brought up Elizabeth repeatedly, how beloved she'd been, how the community still mourned her, how irreplaceable she was. Of course, Gideon has done his best, Lenora said, her voice dripping with sympathy. But a man can't raise children alone. They need a woman's touch. He has help now, one of the other women ventured, glancing at Mara. Oh yes, his cook. Lenora's smile was sharp as broken glass. Though I suppose when one is desperate, one makes do with whatever, whomever, is available. Mara set down her fork carefully. The entire table went silent. Mrs. Crow, she said, her voice calm and clear. Is there something you'd like to say to me directly? Lenora's eyes widened with false innocence. Why, whatever do you mean, dear? I mean the implications you've been making all evening. If you have questions about my position in the Mercer household, I'm happy to answer them. There's no need to be defensive. I'm not being defensive. I'm being clear. I'm employed as a cook. I care for the children and maintain the household. There's nothing scandalous or inappropriate about that arrangement. Of course not, Lenora said smoothly, though you must admit appearances matter. A single woman living with a widower and his children, people do talk. Let them talk. Mara met her gaze without flinching. I've spent my entire life listening to people talk about me, my size, my body, my worth. I stopped caring what small minds think a long time ago. A shocked gasp ran around the table. No one spoke to Lenora Crow like that. How bold, Lenora said, her smile frozen. Though I suppose when one has nothing to lose socially, boldness comes naturally. And when one has everything to lose, cruelty comes naturally, Mara replied. Which is worse, do you think? The silence was absolute. Gideon was staring at Mara with something like awe and terror mixed together. Silas Crow's face had gone dark. And Lenora's mask had finally cracked. I think, she said, her voice ice, that you forget your place, Miss Holloway. My place is with the Mercer family. Where's yours? The question hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Before Lenora could respond, Silas stood abruptly. I think it's time we discussed business, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Gideon, if you'd join me in my study. It wasn't a request. Gideon rose slowly, his eyes meeting Mara's across the table. She gave him a small nod. The 2 men left. The remaining guests immediately erupted in whispered conversation, shooting glances at Mara that ranged from shocked to admiring to horrified. Lenora stood gracefully. Ladies, shall we retire to the parlor? Mara found herself herded with the other women into a sitting room where Lenora presided over tea like a judge presiding over a sentencing. Miss Holloway, she said with poisonous sweetness, you must tell us all about yourself. Where did you work before the Mercer Ranch? Various places, hotels, private families. And why did you leave? My husband died. I needed a new position. How convenient that Gideon was hiring. Lenora's smile was all teeth. Though one wonders why a woman of your experience would settle for a rough ranch position. I needed work. He needed help. It was a practical arrangement. And the children? They've accepted you? Mara thought of Noah's small hand against her apron, Sadie's tears, Lila's drawings. We're managing. How kind of you, though of course they must miss their real mother terribly. Every day, Mara said quietly. But missing her doesn't mean they can't move forward. Move forward? Lenora's eyes glittered. Or replace her with whatever substitute they can find. I'm not replacing anyone. I'm just trying to help. Are you? Lenora leaned forward. Or are you a lonely widow who saw an opportunity? A vulnerable man grieving children, a household desperate for anyone to fill the void? The other women gasped. This had gone beyond social sparring into open accusation.
Mara felt rage building in her chest, but she kept her voice level. You know nothing about me, she said. Nothing about my intentions or my character. You've decided who I am based on my appearance and your own assumptions. I know what I see. A woman with no prospects using grief-stricken children to secure a place. Enough. The word cracked like a whip. Everyone turned. Gideon stood in the doorway, his face like thunder. Behind him, Silas looked furious. We're leaving, Gideon said. But dessert hasn't been served, Lenore started. I said we're leaving. Gideon's voice was hard as stone. He looked at Mara. Now. Mara rose immediately. She walked past Lenora without another word, past the shocked women, out into the hallway where Gideon waited. They left the Crow estate in complete silence. The wagon was a mile down the road before either of them spoke. What happened in the study? Mara asked. Gideon's hands were white-knuckled on the reins. Crow made his final offer, twice what the land's worth. He said if I didn't take it, he'd make sure I lost everything anyway. He threatened you. He promised me. Said he owns the deputy, controls the bank, and has enough influence to make sure no one in the valley will trade with me. He'll strangle the ranch slowly until I have no choice but to sell. Can he do that? He's already doing it. The burned fence was just the beginning. Gideon's voice was hollow. He told me to think of my children, said Elizabeth would want them safe and provided for, not starving on a failing ranch. He used your wife against you. Yes. Mara felt fury building. What did you say? I told him to go to hell. A fierce pride surged through her. Good. Good? Gideon turned to look at her. Mara, I just declared war on the most powerful man in the valley. There's nothing good about that. You stood your ground. You refused to be bullied. That's everything. It's suicide. Maybe, but at least it's your choice. They rode in silence for a while, the moon rising over the mountains, casting everything in silver light. I heard what Lenora said to you, Gideon said finally, about being a substitute, about using the children. Mara's stomach tightened. Did you believe her? No. The answer came immediately. I saw your face when she said it. You looked like she'd struck you. She did, just not physically. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought you there. I chose to come. Still, you didn't deserve that treatment. I've had worse, Mara said, and it was true. But somehow Lenora's words had cut deeper than most, maybe because they touched on fears Mara hadn't wanted to acknowledge. That she was using these children to fill the hole James's death had left. That she was taking advantage of Gideon's grief for her own purposes. For what it's worth, Gideon said quietly, I don't think you're using us. I think you're the first person in a long time who's actually tried to help without wanting something in return. I want a home, Mara said honestly. I want a place to belong. That's not nothing. It's not taking advantage either. It's just, he struggled for words. Human. They were almost to the ranch when Gideon spoke again. What you said to Lenora about not caring what small minds think, did you mean that? Every word. How? His voice was raw. How do you stop caring? Mara thought about that. You don't really. You just decide that living your truth matters more than their opinions. That being yourself, even the parts that make others uncomfortable, is worth more than their approval. That sounds lonely. It can be, but it's better than disappearing. Gideon nodded slowly, processing this. When they reached the ranch, the children poured out to meet them, anxious and full of questions. Gideon deflected them all, sent them to bed, stood in the dark yard staring at his house like he'd never seen it before. "It's begun," he said quietly. Mara remembered those same words from her first night here. "What do you mean?" "Crow's war. It starts now." The fence was just his opening move. Gideon turned to look at her. "You should leave, Mara, before it gets worse. I'll give you enough money to—" "No. You don't know what he's capable of." "Neither do you. Not really. But we'll find out together." Mara stepped closer. "I told you before. I'm not leaving. Not this family. Not this fight." "Why? What is it about us that's worth risking everything for?" Mara looked at the house where 6 children slept, where a girl had taught her to sew, and a boy had pressed against her apron seeking comfort, where a man was learning to fight again. "Because you're worth fighting for," she said simply. "All of you. And I'm tired of running from fights that matter." Gideon stared at her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for staying, for fighting, for everything." Then he released her and walked into the house, leaving Mara standing in the moonlight, her heart pounding, wondering what exactly had just shifted between them. Inside, she found Elias waiting in the kitchen. "So?" the boy demanded. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough." "Did Crow threaten Papa?" "Yes." "And?" "And your father told him to go to hell." Elias's eyes widened. Then, for the first time since Mara had arrived, the boy smiled, a real smile, fierce and proud. "Good," he said. "That's what I said." They stood there in the dark kitchen, 2 people who'd started as adversaries finding themselves on the same side. "I was wrong about you," Elias said abruptly. "When you first came, I thought—" He stopped, uncomfortable. "You thought I'd leave like the others." "Yeah, but you stood up to Mrs. Crow tonight, Papa told us." "No one does that." "Someone should." "Why you, though? You don't owe us anything." Mara thought about Noah's nightmares and Sadie's tears and Lila's broken doll and this angry boy who was really just scared. "Maybe I owe myself," she said. "Maybe I'm tired of watching bullies win." Elias nodded slowly. "There's going to be trouble. Real trouble." "I know. And you're still staying?" "I'm still staying." The boy's throat worked. "Then I'm glad you're here." It was the closest thing to an apology and a thank you Mara was likely to get from him. She accepted it with a simple nod. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Mara listened to the house settle around her and wondered what she'd set in motion. Lenora Crow would spread tonight's confrontation all over the valley. Silas would escalate his campaign against the ranch. And Gideon? Gideon had held her like she mattered, like she was more than just hired help. Mara touched her chest where his arms had been and told herself it meant nothing, that it was just gratitude, that she was reading too much into a moment of shared fear and defiance. But deep down, in a place she'd thought had died with James, something had stirred back to life. And that terrified her more than anything Silas Crow could do. The trouble started small, the way forest fires often do. A spark so minor you don't notice until the smoke is already choking you. 3 days after the dinner at the Crows, the mercantile in Stillwater refused Gideon's credit. The owner, a thin man named Hewitt, who'd known Gideon for 10 years, wouldn't meet his eyes as he explained that store policy had changed. "Cash only from now on," Hewitt said, his hands fidgeting with the counter edge. "For everyone." "Since when?" Gideon asked, though he already knew the answer. "Since Mr. Crow bought the note on my building. New ownership, new policies." So it had begun, just as Silas had promised. Gideon left empty-handed, returned to the ranch, and told Mara they'd be living off what they could grow and hunt until further notice. "How long can we manage that?" she asked. "Through winter if we're careful, maybe spring." He didn't say what they both knew, that by spring they'd be desperate enough for Silas's offer to look like salvation instead of surrender. 2 days later, the twins came running from the north pasture, white-faced and breathless. "Papa, the water's gone!" The creek that fed their livestock had been diverted, logs and stones carefully placed upstream to redirect the flow away from Mercerland and onto Crow property. It was legal enough if you squinted, though everyone knew the water rights had been shared for generations. Gideon and Elias spent 12 hours breaking the dam and restoring flow, only to find it rebuilt the next morning. He's testing us, Gideon said, staring at the reconstructed barrier, seeing how much we'll take before we break. Then we don't break, Mara said. But the pressure kept building. A week passed. The fence along the eastern boundary was cut in 3 places, letting cattle wander onto Crow land where they were legally impounded. Gideon had to pay retrieval fees he couldn't afford. Tools went missing from the barn, small things at first, then larger equipment. A harness, an axe, the good saw. And through it all, Lenore's poison spread through town like infection. Every time Mara went to Stillwater, which she had to for the supplies Hewitt would sell for cash, women whispered behind their hands. Men looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. The fat widow living in sin with Gideon Mercer. The opportunist taking advantage of grieving children. The woman too desperate to care about propriety. Mara heard it all, ignored it all, kept her spine straight and her face calm even when Mrs. Patterson from the church crossed the street rather than walk past her. But one afternoon in mid-October, things escalated beyond whispers. Mara was loading supplies into the wagon. Flour, salt, the few things she'd managed to buy with coins scraped from the household fund, when 3 women approached. She recognized them from the Crow dinner. Bankers' wives, ranchers' daughters, women who'd never worked a day in their corseted lives. The leader was Margaret Sutton, Lenore's closest friend, a narrow woman with a smile like a paper cut. "Miss Holloway," she said, her voice carrying across the street. "How surprising to see you in town. I'd have thought you'd be too busy at the ranch to leave the children unattended." Mara set down the flour sack carefully. "The children are with their father. They're hardly unattended." "Of course. Though one does wonder about a man who needs so much help from his female staff." Margaret's eyes glittered with malice. "Elizabeth managed that household entirely on her own." "Elizabeth had a husband who was present," Mara said quietly. "Not one broken by grief." "Oh, but Gideon seems quite recovered lately. Almost cheerful, some say. One might even call it inappropriate, given how recently his wife passed." The other women tittered. Mara felt heat rise in her chest. "Mrs. Sutton, if you have something to say to me, say it plainly instead of hiding behind insinuation." "Very well." Margaret stepped closer. Her voice dropping to a hiss meant only for Mara's ears. "Everyone knows what you are. A desperate woman clinging to a widower's household because no decent establishment would hire someone of your size and situation. You're taking advantage of those motherless children and that grief-addled man, and it's shameful. I'm doing my job." "Your job?" Margaret's laugh was cruel. "Is that what we're calling it? Living under the same roof, caring for his children, warming his—" "Finish that sentence and I'll make you regret it," Mara said, her voice deadly calm. Margaret's eyes widened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm promising you. Say what you want about me. I don't care, but imply something inappropriate about those children or their father, and I will ensure everyone in this valley knows exactly what kind of woman you are, starting with how you treat your husband's housemaid." The color drained from Margaret's face. Whatever she did to her servants, she didn't want it publicized. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Margaret turned sharply and stalked away, her companion scurrying after her. Mara finished loading the wagon with shaking hands. She'd won that round, but she'd also made an enemy. Another one. When she returned to the ranch, Sadie was waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry. "What happened?" "Nothing I couldn't handle. Mrs. Patterson came by while you were gone. She said—" Sadie's voice cracked. "She said people are talking about you and Papa, about what it means that you're living here. People always talk. But they're saying terrible things, that you and Papa are—" The girl couldn't finish. Mara climbed down from the wagon and took Sadie's hands. "Look at me. Whatever they're saying, it's not true. I'm your cook and housekeeper, that's all." "Then why are they saying it?" "Because your father told Silas Crow no, and this is how Crow punishes him, by attacking his reputation and anyone associated with him." "But it's not fair." "No, it's not. But life rarely is." Sadie's face crumpled. "I hate this. I hate that Mama's gone and everything's falling apart and people are cruel and I can't fix any of it." Mara pulled the girl into her arms, letting her sob against her shoulder. Over Sadie's head, she saw Gideon standing in the barn doorway, watching them with an expression of such raw pain it made her chest ache. That night, after the children were in bed, Gideon found Mara in the kitchen. Sadie told me what happened in town. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. Margaret Sutton is Lenora's mouthpiece. Whatever she said Lenora wanted said. He slumped into a chair. This is my fault. I should have taken Crow's offer, should have sold and moved the children somewhere safe. And let him win? At least they'd have a future. Running away isn't a future. It's just postponing the next fight. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Mara sat across from him. I spent 3 years running after James died. Different cities, different kitchens, always one step ahead of my reputation or my grief or my own reflection. It didn't make anything better. It just made me exhausted. Gideon looked at her with tired eyes. What changed? I came here. I stopped running. And look where that's gotten you. Slandered in town, worked to the bone, tied to a losing fight that isn't even yours. It is mine, though. The moment I decided to stay, it became mine. Why? His voice broke slightly. Why make this your fight? You could leave tomorrow, find another position somewhere Lenora Crow's poison hasn't reached, because I don't want another position. I want this one. The words came out more forceful than she intended. I want these children, this house, this... She stopped before she said something she couldn't take back. Gideon was staring at her. This what? This life, she finished quietly. Messy and difficult and under attack as it is, I want it. Is that so hard to believe? Yes. No. I don't know. He rubbed his face. Elizabeth used to say I was terrible at accepting help, that I'd rather break under the weight than let someone else carry part of it. It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name without flinching. Was she right? Mara asked gently. Probably. She usually was. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You would have liked her. Or maybe you'd have driven each other crazy. You're both stubborn enough. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. Gideon's expression sobered. She died believing I'd protect them. The children, the ranch, everything we built together. And I've failed at every turn. You haven't failed. You're still fighting. Barely. And every day it gets harder. Every day Crow finds a new way to strangle us. His hands clenched on the table. The mercantile, the water, the stock fees. He's bleeding us dry. And now he's coming after you too, because you're the one thing keeping this household functioning. Let him come. I'm not as breakable as he thinks. Everyone breaks eventually. Then I'll break fighting, not surrendering. Gideon looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're extraordinary, you know that? The words landed like a physical blow. Mara's breath caught. I'm really not. You are. You walk into a disaster, take abuse from strangers, work yourself ragged for children who aren't yours, and you act like it's nothing. It's not nothing. It's everything. Mara's voice was barely a whisper. Don't you understand? This place, these children, they gave me a reason to stop surviving and start living again. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Gideon opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, footsteps creaked overhead. Noah appeared at the top of the stairs, small and silent in his nightshirt. Mara rose immediately. Bad dream? The boy nodded, his eyes finding hers in the lamplight. She climbed the stairs, gathered him up, and carried him back to bed. As she tucked him in, his small hand caught hers. Stay, he whispered. It was only the second word she'd heard him speak, and it shattered something inside her chest. I'm here, she whispered back. I'm not going anywhere. She sat beside his bed until his breathing evened out, then returned downstairs to find Gideon still at the table, his head in his hands. He spoke, she said softly. Gideon looked up sharply. What did he say? Stay. His face crumpled. He hasn't asked anyone to stay since Elizabeth. He couldn't finish. Mara moved to him, put a hand on his shoulder. Then I'm honored, he asked me. Gideon's hand came up to cover hers. They stayed like that for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, the touch burning through the fabric of her dress. Then he pulled away, stood abruptly. You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Why? What's tomorrow? I'm riding to the Northern Valley to talk to Sam Richardson. He's got no love for Crow, and he might be willing to trade supplies for labor. I'll go with you. Mara, someone needs to watch your back.
Crow's men have been circling the property. You shouldn't ride alone. I can handle myself. So can I. And 2 is safer than 1. Gideon looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. Fine, but we leave at dawn. They did.
The ride to Richardson's ranch took 3 hours through country that grew progressively wilder. Mara had never been this deep into the mountains, and the landscape was both beautiful and threatening, sheer cliffs dropping into valleys, forests so thick the sun barely penetrated, and everywhere the sense of being watched. "You feel it too?" Gideon asked, noticing her tension. "Someone's out here. Probably Crow's men. He likes to know where I am." "That doesn't bother you." "It terrifies me, but showing fear is what he wants." Sam Richardson's ranch was smaller than Gideon's, but well-maintained, with sturdy fences and healthy-looking stock. Richardson himself was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Gideon with a firm handshake, then studied Mara with open curiosity. "So you're the cook causing all the fuss?" "I'm the cook," Mara confirmed. "I don't know about the fuss." Richardson barked a laugh. "Hell, woman, Lenore Crow's been spreading stories about you from here to the state line. You must have really gotten under her skin." "I told her the truth. Apparently that's unforgivable." "It usually is with people like her." Richardson gestured them toward his house. "Come in. We'll talk." Over coffee, real coffee, a luxury Mara hadn't tasted in weeks, Gideon laid out his situation. The sabotage, the credit cuts, the systematic campaign to drive him under. Richardson listened in grim silence. "Crow's been pulling this same scheme for years," he said finally. "That's how he got the Patterson land, the Morrison place, probably half a dozen others. He finds a weak point, debt, grief, illness, and he pushes until people break." "How do you resist him?" Mara asked. "Carefully. I've got no debt, no family he can threaten, and I'm mean enough that his men don't want the fight." Richardson's eyes were hard. "But you, Mercer, you've got 6 kids and a ranch hanging by a thread. That makes you vulnerable." "I know." "So what's your play? Because standing alone against Crow is suicide." Gideon's jaw tightened. "I don't know yet. I'm hoping to find allies, people willing to stand together. Good luck with that. Most folks are too scared. Crow owns the bank, the mercantile, half the grazing rights in the valley. Cross him, and you're finished." "Then I'll be finished, but I won't sell." Richardson studied him for a long moment. "You're as stubborn as your wife was." The words landed like a punch. Gideon's face went pale. "You knew Elizabeth?" Mara asked carefully. "We all did. She was something special, tough as nails, wouldn't back down from anyone." Richardson's expression softened. "She stood up to Crow once, years back when he tried to claim water rights that weren't his, told him to his face he was a thief and a coward. He never forgot that." "Are you saying, Gideon's voice was strained. "Are you saying Crow's campaign is personal because of something Elizabeth did?" "I'm saying powerful men hold grudges, and Crow's had his eye on your land since before she died." Richardson paused. "The timing of her death was convenient for him, wasn't it? You falling apart, the ranch struggling." "She died in childbirth," Gideon said hoarsely. "There was nothing suspicious about it." "I'm not suggesting there was. I'm just saying Crow's not above using tragedy to his advantage." The ride home was tense and silent. Gideon's face was like carved stone, his hands white-knuckled on the reins. Richardson had agreed to trade supplies for labor, a small victory, but the conversation had opened old wounds. They were an hour from home when Gideon finally spoke. "Do you think he's right? That Crow's doing this because of Elizabeth?" "I think Crow does things because he's cruel and greedy. Whether your wife challenged him years ago or not, he wants your land. That's reason enough. But if she hadn't stood up to him, if she'd just let it go, then she wouldn't have been the woman you loved," Mara said firmly. "You can't blame her for having courage." "I don't blame her, I blame myself, for not being strong enough to protect what she built, for letting it all fall apart." "You didn't let anything fall apart. You survived the worst thing that can happen to a person. The fact that you're still standing is remarkable." "I'm not standing, I'm barely crawling." "Then crawl. It's better than lying down." Gideon almost smiled at that. "You don't give an inch, do you?" "Not when it matters." They were nearly home when they saw the smoke. Gideon kicked his horse into a gallop, Mara right behind him. They crested the hill overlooking the ranch and her heart stopped. The house was fine. The barn was fine. But the southern pasture was burning, not the grass. That was too green to catch easily. The haystacks. 3 of them, carefully built and dried for winter feed, going up in flames that lit the twilight sky orange and terrible. By the time they reached the yard, Elias and the twins were already fighting the fire with buckets from the creek, their faces black with ash, their eyes wild with panic. "When did it start?" Gideon shouted, already moving to help. "Maybe 20 minutes ago," Elias yelled back. "We saw riders leaving to the south." Riders. Not lightning. Not accident. Deliberate. They fought the fire for 2 hours, but it was hopeless. The hay was too dry, the flames too hot. All they could do was keep it from spreading to the barn or the house. By the time the last embers died, 3 months' worth of winter feed was reduced to ash and twisted wire. Gideon stood staring at the destruction, his face illuminated by the dying flames. The children clustered behind him, Elias with burned hands, the twins crying silently, Sadie holding Noah and Lila close. "That was our winter supply," Sadie whispered. "How will we feed the stock?" "I don't know," Gideon said. "Papa," "I said I don't know." His voice cracked, too loud, too desperate. The children flinched. Even Elias took a step back. Mara moved between them, her voice cutting through the panic. "Everyone inside, now. Wash up, eat something, get to bed." "But the fire," Samuel started, "is out. There's nothing more we can do tonight. Inside." They obeyed her, even Elias, filing into the house like exhausted soldiers. Mara turned to Gideon, who stood frozen, staring at the smoking ruins. "Come inside. You need to rest. Come inside. Mara, he burned our winter feed. Without hay, the stock will starve. And if the stock starves, I know. We're finished. He's finally done it. We can't recover from this. We'll find a way." "There is no way." Gideon's composure finally shattered. "Don't you understand? This was it. My last reserve. My emergency supply. Without it, I have nothing to bargain with, nothing to sell, no way to keep the ranch running through winter. We're done." "So what? You're just going to give up? Let Crow win?" "I'm out of options." "You're out of easy options," Mara shot back. "But there are always choices. We trade labor for hay from Richardson. We sell off part of the herd early, take the bad prices. We find another way." "You're not listening." "No, you're not listening. To me, to your children, to anyone telling you there's still fight left." She grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "I know you're scared. I know this feels impossible. But the moment you quit, Crow wins everything. Your land, your children's future, Elizabeth's legacy. Is that what you want?" "Of course not." "Then fight. Stop drowning in what you've lost and fight for what you still have." Gideon stared at her, breathing hard, something breaking behind his eyes. Then he did something that shocked them both. He kissed her. It was desperate, messy, born of fear and frustration, and something deeper that had been building for weeks. His hands cupped her face, his lips crashed against hers, and for a moment Mara forgot how to breathe. Then reality crashed back. She pulled away, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her mouth. "I'm sorry," Gideon said immediately, his face horrified. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. That was completely inappropriate." "Yes, it was." "I wasn't thinking. I just—" He ran his hands through his hair. "I don't know what I was doing." Mara's heart was hammering. Her lips still burned where his had been. "We can't. This can't happen." "I know." "The children—" "I know." "And the town is already talking." "I know." His voice broke. "I know all of that. But for one moment I wanted—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter what I wanted. You're right. This can't happen." They stood in the dark yard, smoke still drifting on the wind, the ruins of the haystack glowing between them. "I should go inside," Mara said. "Mara. Good night, Gideon." She fled to the house, to her small room, closed the door, and leaned against it with shaking hands. What had she done? What had they done? This couldn't happen. She was the cook. He was her employer. There were children involved, reputations at stake, and Lenora Crow would use any hint of impropriety to destroy them all. But her lips still tingled, her heart still raced, and somewhere deep inside, a truth she'd been avoiding bloomed into terrifying clarity. She was falling for Gideon Mercer. Maybe had been since that first night when Noah pressed against her apron. Maybe since the moment Gideon looked at her like she mattered. Maybe since she'd decided to stay and fight for a family that wasn't hers, but felt like it could be. And that was more dangerous than anything Silas Crow could do. Mara didn't sleep that night. She heard Gideon come inside hours later, heard him climb the stairs to his room, heard the house settle into uneasy quiet. At dawn, she rose and made breakfast with mechanical efficiency. The children appeared one by one, subdued and anxious. Gideon came last, his eyes meeting Mara's briefly before skittering away. They didn't speak about the kiss. They didn't speak about the fire. They just moved through the morning routine like actors following a script, pretending normalcy while the world burned around them. It was Elias who finally broke the silence. "I'm riding to town," he announced. "We need to know if anyone saw who did this." "No one will talk," Gideon said dully. "Maybe not to you, but they might talk to me." "Elias, I'm going." The boy's voice was hard. "Someone burned our hay. Someone's been sabotaging us for weeks, and no one's doing anything about it. Well, I'm done waiting. It's too dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. At least this way I'm doing something instead of just watching us die slowly." Father and son glared at each other across the kitchen. "Let him go," Mara said quietly. Both of them turned to stare at her. "He's right. We need information. And sometimes a boy asking questions gets answers a man wouldn't." Gideon looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. "Fine, but you take someone with you." "I'll go alone." "You'll take Samuel and Simon, stay together, and be back before dark. Those are my terms." Elias nodded sharply and left to collect the twins. When the boys were gone, Sadie approached her father hesitantly. "Papa, what are we going to do?" "About the hay, I mean." Gideon's face was gray. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." "Are we going to lose the ranch?" "I'm trying to prevent that." "But are we?" Her voice rose. "Because it feels like we're losing anyway, just slower." "Sadie, I'm not a child, Papa. I see what's happening. The money's running out, the feed's gone, and that man is trying to destroy us." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And I'm scared. I'm so scared and I don't know what to do." Gideon pulled her into his arms, his own eyes wet. "I know. I'm scared too." It was the first time Mara had heard him admit it out loud. They stood like that for a long moment, father and daughter clinging to each other while their world fractured around them. Then Lila's scream shattered the quiet. They ran. The little girl stood at the back door pointing toward the barn with a trembling hand. Nailed to the barn door was a crudely painted sign, "Sell or Burn." Underneath, someone had painted a crude drawing of a house in flames. Gideon stared at it, his face draining of color. "He's threatening to burn the house," Sadie whispered. "With us in it," Gideon added, his voice hollow. Mara felt ice flood her veins. This had gone beyond business intimidation. This was a death threat. "We go to the law," she said. "There is no law. The deputy works for Crow. Then we go above him. The territorial marshal is 3 days' ride away. And by the time he got here, Crow would have a dozen witnesses swearing he was nowhere near our property." "So what?" Mara's voice rose. "We just wait for him to make good on his threat? Wait for him to murder us in our beds?" "I don't know," Gideon shouted. "I don't know what to do anymore. Every option leads to disaster." The children were crying now, even Noah, silent tears streaming down his face. Mara looked at the sign, at the terrified family, at Gideon's broken expression, and she made a decision. "Then we go to the source," she said quietly. "What?" "I'm going to the Crow estate. I'm going to talk to Silas myself." "Mara, no. Someone has to. And it can't be you. You're too angry, too close to breaking. But me?" She met his eyes. "I'm just the cook, remember? Harmless, insignificant. Maybe he'll actually listen. He'll destroy you. He's already trying. What's one more conversation?" Gideon grabbed her shoulders. "You can't. I won't let you walk into that man's house alone. You don't let me do anything. This is my choice. Mara, I'm going, today, before he has a chance to make good on that threat." She looked at the children. "Before someone gets hurt." Gideon's hands tightened on her shoulders. His face was a storm of fear and frustration and something else she couldn't name. "Please," he said hoarsely, "please don't do this. Give me another option." He had none. An hour later, Mara climbed into the wagon, wearing Elizabeth's altered dress, her hair as neat as she could make it, her spine straight despite the terror coursing through her. Gideon stood beside the wagon, his hand on the rail. "If he threatens you, if anything happens, I'll be fine." "You don't know that." "No, but I'm going anyway." She looked down at him, this man who'd kissed her in desperation and rage, who was trying so hard to hold his world together. "Take care of the children. I'll be back before dark." "Mara," his voice broke. "What you said last night about not being able to, about this not happening." "Don't. Not now. I just need you to know—" "Gideon, please." He stepped back, his hand falling away. Mara drove toward the Crow estate alone, watching the ranch disappear behind her, wondering if she'd just made the bravest or stupidest decision of her life. Probably both. The Crow house looked even more imposing in daylight, a monument to wealth built on other people's suffering. Mara tied off the wagon and walked to the front door with her head high. A servant answered, eyeing her with barely concealed disdain. "I need to speak with Mr. Crow." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to hear what I have to say." The servant looked skeptical but disappeared inside. 5 minutes later, he returned. "Mr. Crow will see you, briefly." Silas's study was all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. The man himself sat behind a massive desk, his cold eyes assessing Mara like livestock. "Miss Holloway, what an unexpected visit." "I'll be direct, Mr. Crow. Stop threatening the Mercer family." His eyebrows rose. "I beg your pardon?" "The sign on the barn, the fire, the sabotage. All of it. It stops now." Silas leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at his lips. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You've been systematically destroying Gideon's ranch to force him to sell, and now you're threatening to burn his house with his children inside." "Those are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" "You know I don't." "Then this conversation is pointless." He started to rise. "I'm not finished." Something in her tone made him pause. "You want the Mercer land?" Mara continued. "Fine. Make a fair offer. Negotiate like a human being instead of a monster." Silas laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "Why would I negotiate when time is on my side? Every day Mercer struggles, every disaster that befalls him drives the price down. Eventually he'll be so desperate he'll take whatever I offer. And if he doesn't, if he holds out, then he'll lose everything anyway. The ranch, his children's future, possibly his life." Silas's smile widened. "Accidents happen in mountain country, Miss Holloway. Fires, falls, winter storms. It would be tragic if something happened to him, or to those children." The casual cruelty took Mara's breath away. "You're threatening to kill them." "I'm stating facts. The frontier is dangerous, especially for stubborn men who refuse common sense. This is murder. This is business." Silas stood, towering over her. "Now, let me state some facts for you, Miss Holloway. You're nobody, a fat widow with no prospects, no power, and no future except what Gideon Mercer's charity provides. You have no standing to make demands or threats. You're not his wife, not his family, just an employee he'll discard the moment things get too difficult." Each word was a blade, carefully aimed. "So here's what's going to happen," Silas continued. "You're going to return to that ranch and convince Mercer to accept my offer. You're going to tell him it's over, that he's lost, and that selling is his only option. And if you do that, if you help me close this deal, I'll make it worth your while. Enough money to start fresh somewhere else. A reference to whatever kitchen you want, a way out of the disaster you've attached yourself to." Mara stared at him. "You're trying to bribe me." "I'm offering you survival. Take it or leave it, but make your choice quickly. My patience is running out." "Then let me make something clear to you, Mr. Crow." Mara stepped closer, her voice dropping to ice. "I will never convince Gideon to sell. I will never help you steal that land. And if you harm one hair on those children's heads, I will make it my life's mission to destroy you. I may be nobody, as you say, but nobody has nothing to lose, and that makes me very dangerous." Silas's face darkened. "Get out of my house." "Gladly." And tell Mercer he has 1 week. 1 week to accept my final offer or face the consequences. Tell him yourself, Mara said, and walked out. Her hands didn't start shaking until she was halfway home. What had she done? She'd confronted the most powerful man in the valley, rejected his bribe, and made threats she had no way of backing up. She'd probably made everything worse, but she'd also drawn a line in the dirt, and she'd meant every word. When she reached the ranch, Gideon was pacing the yard. He ran to the wagon before she'd even stopped. Thank God, I thought. He stopped, taking in her face. What happened? We have a week. A week for what? To accept his offer or face the consequences. He was very clear about what those consequences might include. Gideon's face went white. He threatened you. He threatened all of us. That's it. We're done. I'm taking the children and we're leaving tonight. And go where? Mara climbed down from the wagon. Run with no money, no plan, 6 children in tow? Gideon, that's exactly what he wants. He wants you scattered and desperate and alone. Better alone and alive than...
Then what? Fighting? Standing your ground? She grabbed his arm. Listen to me. We have a week. That's 7 days to find allies, make a plan, or figure out another option. But running won't save you. It'll just mean Crow wins and you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. At least my children would be alive to spend that life. Would they? Or would they grow up knowing their father gave up? That he let a bully take everything? Gideon stared at her, angry and afraid and desperate. I can't lose them, he whispered. I can't. They're all I have left. Then fight for them, not by running, by standing. They stood in the yard, the afternoon sun slanting gold across the mountains, and Mara wondered if she'd just condemned them all to death. But at least they'd die fighting. And somehow that mattered more than she could say. The week Silas Crow had given them felt like living with a noose around their necks, waiting for someone to kick the chair. That first night after Mara's confrontation with Crow, Gideon called a family meeting. All 6 children gathered in the kitchen while he explained as gently as he could that things were about to get worse. I need you to understand, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Mr. Crow wants our land. He's going to try to scare us into leaving. There might be more trouble, more fires, maybe worse. Worse how? Lila whispered, clutching her broken doll. Gideon's jaw tightened. I don't know, sweetheart, but I need you all to be careful. No wandering off alone. Stay close to the house. And if you see strangers on the property, you run and tell me or Mara immediately. Are we going to die? Samuel asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like smoke. No, Gideon said firmly. I won't let that happen. But how can you stop it? Elias's voice was sharp with frustration. You heard what Mara said. Crow threatened to burn the house, with us in it. How do you fight someone like that? By not being alone anymore. Gideon looked at each of his children in turn. Tomorrow, Mara and I are going to talk to every rancher in the valley. We're going to find people willing to stand with us. And if no one will, Sadie asked quietly, then we stand by ourselves. But we stand. After the children were sent to bed, Mara found Gideon on the porch, staring out at the dark mountains. You can't promise them they won't die, she said quietly. I know, but I had to say something. He rubbed his face. When Elizabeth was dying, I promised her I'd keep them safe, and I've broken that promise every day since. You're still here, still fighting. That's keeping the promise. Is it, or am I just dragging them down with me? Mara moved to stand beside him. The night was cold, stars sharp overhead, the kind of beautiful that made you forget how dangerous the world could be. When James died, she said slowly, I wanted to die too. Not in a dramatic way. I never considered doing anything to myself. But I wanted to stop existing, stop taking up space, stop being a burden to a world that clearly didn't want me. Gideon turned to look at her. What stopped you? He asked. Stubbornness, mostly. And this idea that maybe, somewhere, there was a place I could matter, a place where my existence wasn't just tolerated, but wanted. She met his eyes. I think I found it here. Mara, I'm not saying this to make things more complicated. I know the situation we're in. I know what people are saying, but I need you to understand why I'm staying, why I'm fighting. It's not charity or obligation. It's because this... She gestured to the house behind them, the land around them. This feels like home,
And I've never had that before. Not really. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "About the other night, the kiss. We don't have to talk about it."
Yes, we do. Because it keeps happening in my head over and over, and I don't know what to do with that. Mara's heart stuttered. Gideon, let me finish, please. He turned to face her fully. Elizabeth's been gone almost 2 years, and for most of that time I've been dead too, just going through motions, barely surviving. But then you came here and something started to wake up again, something I thought I'd buried with her. This isn't the time, Mara said, even as her chest tightened with longing. I know. Believe me, I know. We're fighting for survival. The children are terrified. The last thing any of us needs is whatever this is between us. His voice dropped. But I can't stop feeling it, and I can't stop seeing the way you look at me sometimes. Like maybe you feel it too. Mara wanted to lie, wanted to deny it, wanted to protect them both from the complication and danger of this confession. But she'd spent too many years lying about who she was and what she wanted. I do, she whispered. Feel it. But that doesn't mean we can do anything about it. Why not? Because the town already thinks the worst of us. Because your children don't need the confusion. Because... She stopped, the real reason catching in her throat. Because what? Because I'm terrified that if I let myself want this, want you, it'll get taken away like everything else I've ever loved. The words came out raw and honest, stripped of any protection. Gideon reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. I can't promise it won't be taken away, he said quietly. I can't promise we'll survive the week, much less whatever comes after. But I can promise that right now, in this moment, you matter to me. You and what you've done for my family. It matters more than I know how to say. Mara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. This is a terrible time to have this conversation. I know, but we might not get another chance. They stood like that, hands joined, the cold wind pulling at their clothes, and Mara felt something shift between them. Not the desperate kiss from before, but something deeper. An acknowledgement, a possibility. Then a child cried out inside and the moment shattered. They found Noah standing at the top of the stairs, shaking and silent, tears streaming down his face. Mara gathered him up while Gideon checked the other children, all awake now, frightened by their brother's distress. Nightmare? Gideon asked. Noah nodded against Mara's shoulder. About the fire? Sadie ventured. Another nod. We're safe, Mara said softly, carrying him back to bed. The house isn't burning. Everyone's here. You're safe. But as she tucked him in and sat beside his bed humming that old song, she wondered if she was lying. Were they safe? Could they be, with Silas Crow's threat hanging over them like a blade? She stayed with Noah until he slept, then returned downstairs to find Gideon at the kitchen table with a map spread out before him. What are you doing? Planning. If we're going to find allies, we need to be strategic about it. He pointed to marks on the map. Richardson's already agreed to help. These 3 ranches here, the Hendersons, the Yates family, and old Marcus Flynn, they've all had run-ins with Crow. They might be willing to stand with us. And if they're not, then we try the next ones. And the next, until we find enough people who are tired of being afraid. That could take more than a week. I know. But what choice do we have? None. They had none. The next morning, they split up. Gideon took Elias and rode north to the Henderson ranch. Mara stayed with the younger children, barricading herself in the house and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while her heart hammered with constant fear. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow in the yard sent her to the window. The children felt it too. They were quiet, subdued, barely touching their lunch. Tell us a story, Lila said suddenly. Please, like Mama used to. Mara wasn't sure she could. Her mind was too full of danger and threat. But Lila's pleading eyes were impossible to resist. What kind of story? A brave one, about someone who wins. So Mara told them a story her grandmother had told her, about a girl who was too big for her village, too different, too much. How everyone wanted her to shrink and disappear. But instead she grew bigger, claimed more space, until she was so large she became the mountain itself, protecting everyone who'd tried to diminish her. That's not a real story, Samuel said skeptically.
Sure it is. Just because it's not true doesn't mean it's not real. That doesn't make sense. Most important things don't. Sadie was watching her with an odd expression. Was that story about you? Maybe. Or maybe it's about anyone who's been told they're too much of something. I'm too much sometimes, Sadie admitted quietly. Too angry. Too sad. Too everything. That's not being too much. That's being human. Mama used to say that grief makes everything bigger, that it's okay to feel things fully. Your mother was right. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, and for a moment the fear receded, replaced by something gentler. Connection. Understanding. Then hoofbeats in the yard shattered the peace. Mara's hand flew to the knife on the counter. Children, upstairs, now. But now! They scrambled up the stairs while Mara moved to the window. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. But it wasn't Crow's men. It was Gideon and Elias, and with them were 3 men she didn't recognize. Weathered ranchers on tired horses, all of them wearing expressions of grim determination. She opened the door as they dismounted. Mara, this is John Henderson and his sons, David and Thomas. Gideon's face was tight with controlled excitement. They're willing to help. John Henderson was a bear of a man, 60 if he was a day, with scars on his hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. He nodded to Mara with respect. Ma'am, Gideon tells me you stood up to Crow directly. That takes spine. Or stupidity, Mara said. Sometimes they're the same thing. Henderson's mouth twitched. My family's been in this valley 3 generations. Crow's been trying to squeeze us out for 5 years. We're done running. What changed? Mara asked. You did. David Henderson spoke up, a younger version of his father, maybe 30, with angry eyes. Word spread about what you said at that dinner, how you didn't back down from Lenore Crow. Made us realize we've been cowards, letting that family terrorize everyone while we kept our heads down. So, what's the plan? Mara looked at Gideon. We're organizing. Every rancher who's willing to stand against Crow we bring together. Make it clear he can't pick us off one by one anymore. And you think that'll work? I think it's our only shot. Over the next 3 days, their house became a gathering point. Ranchers appeared. Some Mara recognized from town, others she'd never seen. Not all were willing to join. Some listened to Gideon's plea and rode away shaking their heads, too afraid to risk Crow's wrath. But enough stayed. Sam Richardson returned with 2 neighboring ranchers. The Yates family, a widow and her 3 grown sons, arrived with supplies and anger. Marcus Flynn, an ancient man who remembered when the valley was free range, told stories of Crow's father and grandfather, both of whom had built their empire on theft and intimidation. It's in their blood, Flynn said, his voice raspy. Taking what isn't theirs. Your wife understood that, Mercer. She fought them tooth and nail. I know, Gideon said quietly. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you forgot. You let grief turn you weak. The old man's eyes were sharp. But this woman here, he gestured to Mara. She's got Elizabeth's fire. Maybe you should follow her lead. The word stung Gideon visibly, but he didn't argue. That night, after the last rancher had left and the children were in bed, Mara found Gideon in the barn, brushing down his horse with mechanical precision. Flynn was harsh, she said. Flynn was right. I did let grief make me weak. You were surviving. That's not weakness, isn't it? Elizabeth would have fought from the beginning, would have rallied everyone months ago. Instead, I hid and hoped Crow would leave us alone. You're fighting now. That's what matters. Gideon set down the brush and turned to face her. Do you know what scares me most? What? That even if we win this fight, even if we somehow beat Crow and keep the ranch, I'll still fail them, the children, because I don't know how to be what they need. You're their father. That's what they need. Is it? Because Sadie needs a mother. Noah needs someone who understands his silence. The twins need structure I can't provide. Lila needs gentleness I've forgotten how to give. And Elias, his voice cracked. Elias needs me to be the man I was before. And I don't know if that man exists anymore. Mara moved closer. Then be the man you are now. Imperfect and grieving and trying your best. That's enough. You keep saying that, but what if it's not? Then we figure it out, together. The word hung between them, together. Not employer and employee. Not widower and cook. Something else. Something neither of them was quite ready to name. Gideon reached for her hand. I don't deserve you. Good thing you don't have to deserve me. I'm here anyway. He pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her it was different, slower, gentler, filled with something that felt less like desperation and more like promise. Mara let herself sink into it for just a moment, let herself imagine a world where this could be real and lasting. Then a voice shattered the moment. I knew it! They sprang apart. Elias stood in the barn doorway, his face a mixture of betrayal and fury. Elias, Gideon started. Don't, just don't! The boy's voice shook. Everyone said it. Everyone in town, all those whispers. I defended you. I told them you were just the cook, that Papa would never... He laughed bitterly. But they were right. You're replacing her. You're replacing Mama. That's not what this is, Mara said quietly. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you moved in, took over her kitchen, took over her children, and now you're taking over her husband. Elias, that's enough. Gideon's voice was sharp. Is it? Is it enough? Because I'm tired of pretending. Tired of acting like everything's fine when it's not. Mama's dead, the ranch is dying, some monster's trying to kill us, and you're kissing the cook in the barn like none of it matters. It all matters, Gideon said, his voice breaking. Every bit of it. Your mother, this ranch, keeping you safe. Then act like it. Stop hiding out here with her and fight for us.
I am fighting for you. No, you're fighting for her. Elias pointed at Mara. You've been different since she came. More focused on making sure she stays than on saving the ranch. Well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe we'd be better off if she left. The words hit Mara like a physical blow. Elias, apologize, Gideon demanded. Why? It's true. Things were simple before her. We knew where we stood. Now everything's confused and complicated, and the boy's face crumpled. I want Mama back, and I can't have her, and watching you with someone else makes it hurt worse. Gideon moved toward his son, but Elias backed away. Don't. Just don't. The boy fled into the night. Gideon made to follow, but Mara caught his arm. Let him go. Let him cool down. I can't just... Yes, you can. He's angry and scared and grieving. Going after him now will just make it worse. Gideon's face was anguished. He thinks I'm replacing Elizabeth. I know. Are we? Is that what this is? The question hung heavy between them. I don't know, Mara said honestly. I know I'm not trying to replace her. I could never be what she was to this family, but I also know that what I feel for you, it's real. It's not about filling a void or playing a role. It's just human, Gideon finished. Yes. They stood in the barn, the horses shifting in their stalls, and Mara felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down. Maybe he's right, she said quietly. Maybe I should leave. Maybe my being here is making everything more complicated. No, Gideon's voice was firm. You're not leaving. Not because of town gossip, not because my son is hurting, not because this is complicated. You said you'd stay and fight. Well, we need you. I need you. For what? What am I to you, Gideon? Really? He looked at her and something in his expression made her breath catch. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I know I haven't felt this alive since Elizabeth died. And I know that scares the hell out of me. But losing you, having you walk away, that scares me more. Before Mara could respond, Sadie appeared at the barn door. Papa, Elias didn't come inside, and there's... Her voice trembled. There's riders coming, a lot of them. They ran. The yard was filled with horses, 8, maybe 10. Hard to count in the darkness. Torches lit faces Mara didn't recognize. Men in rough clothes, weapons on their hips surrounding the house. And in front of them all, sitting tall in his saddle, was Silas Crow. Mercer! His voice cut through the night. Come out. We need to talk. Gideon stepped forward, Mara right behind him. The children clustered on the porch, all except Elias, who was nowhere to be seen. Your week's not up, Gideon said, his voice steady despite the tremor Mara could feel running through him. I got impatient. Crow smiled, cold and terrible. I heard you've been rallying the neighbors, trying to build some kind of resistance. That's not very smart, Mercer. I'm not selling.
You will, one way or another. See, I could wait out your stubbornness. Let winter come, let your stock starve, watch you fail slowly. But I'm tired of waiting. Crow gestured to his men. So I'm offering you one more choice. Sign over the deed tonight, and I'll pay you fair price. Refuse, and my men here will ensure you have a very unfortunate accident. You're threatening to kill me? In front of witnesses? Witnesses? Crow laughed. Who's going to testify? Your children? The fat cook? These men all work for me. They'll swear you attacked us, that we acted in self-defense. Mara felt ice flood her veins. He'd thought this through. Every angle, every escape. So what's it going to be? Crow leaned forward in his saddle. Your signature or your life? Gideon's hands clenched at his sides. Mara could see him calculating odds, options, ways out of the trap. There were none. Papa? Sadie whispered from the porch. Please, just sign it. Listen to your daughter, Crow said. Be smart. For a terrible moment, Mara thought Gideon might do it, might surrender just to keep his children safe. Then a voice rang out from the darkness. I don't think so, Crow. John Henderson rode into the torchlight, his sons flanking him. Behind them came Sam Richardson, then the Yates family, then Marcus Flynn, and 6 other ranchers, all armed, all grim-faced. This is a private matter, Crow said, but his voice had lost its certainty. No, it's not. It's a valley matter, and we're done letting you terrorize our neighbors. Henderson looked at Gideon. You want this man's land? You'll have to go through all of us. Crow's face went dark with rage. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but we're making it together. Richardson's hand rested on his rifle. Now I suggest you and your boys turn around and ride home before someone gets hurt. The standoff stretched, tense and terrible. Mara held her breath, waiting for violence to erupt. Then one of Crow's men shifted uneasily in his saddle. Boss, there's a lot of them. I can see that, Crow snapped. Maybe we should... Fine. Crow's voice was poison. You win this round, Mercer, but this isn't over, not by a long shot. He wheeled his horse and rode into the darkness, his men following. The valley ranchers held position until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then Gideon's legs gave out. He sank to his knees in the dirt, shaking with relief, or shock, or both. Mara dropped beside him, her hand on his shoulder. You came, he said hoarsely to Henderson. How did you know? Your boy, the oldest one. He rode to my place hell-bent, said Crow was coming tonight. Henderson dismounted. Kid's got courage, saved your life. Elias appeared from behind the barn, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed. Gideon stood on unsteady legs and moved to his son. For a moment they just stared at each other. Then Gideon pulled the boy into a fierce embrace. Thank you, he whispered. You saved us all. Elias's thin shoulders shook. I'm sorry for what I said, for being angry. I know. Gideon held him tighter. We'll talk. I promise. But right now I just need you to know I love you, more than anything. The boy nodded against his father's chest. The other children poured off the porch, surrounding their father and brother, and for a moment they were just a family again, broken and scared, but together. Mara stepped back to give them space. Henderson approached her. Hell of a thing standing up to Crow the way you did. Not many would have had the guts. I had plenty of fear to go with it. Fear's not the opposite of courage, ma'am. It's the price you pay for it. He tipped his hat. You're good people. This family is lucky to have you. Mara's throat tightened. Thank you for coming, for standing with them. We should have done it sooner, before things got this bad. Henderson looked at the Mercer family, still clustered together in the yard. But better late than never. The ranchers stayed another hour, making plans for watches and patrols to keep Crow's men from returning. When they finally left, promising to check in daily, the household was quiet with exhausted relief. Mara gathered the children for a late supper, but no one was hungry. They picked at their food, still too shaken to eat properly. Finally, Gideon spoke. I need to tell you all something. His voice was quiet but firm. About Mara. About what Elias saw in the barn. Papa, you don't have to... Elias started. Yes, I do. You all deserve the truth. Gideon looked at each child in turn. I care about Mara, more than just as an employee, more than just as someone who helps around the house. I care about her in a way that
He struggled for words. In a way that makes me want her to stay. Not just for you, but for me too. The children were silent, processing this. Does that mean you're getting married? Lila asked innocently. I don't know, we haven't talked about that. But I need you to understand that this doesn't mean I'm forgetting your mother. It doesn't mean I love her any less. It just means... It means you're alive again, Sadie said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. Mama wouldn't want you to be sad forever, Papa. She'd want you to... The girl's voice broke. She'd want you to be happy, even if that means being happy with someone else. Gideon's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure about that? No, but I think it might be true anyway. Sadie looked at Mara. Do you love him? The question was so direct, so honest, that lying felt impossible. I think I do, Mara said quietly. I didn't mean to. I didn't come here looking for that, but yes, I think I love him. And the rest of us? Samuel asked. Do you love us too? Mara's vision blurred. More than I knew it was possible to love children who aren't mine. Then why can't you be? Lila's voice was small but certain. Ours, I mean. Not instead of Mama, but also. There's enough room for both, Sadie added. Isn't there? Mara looked at these children, this fierce, broken, beautiful family that had somehow become hers without her noticing. Yes, she whispered. There's enough room for both. Noah climbed down from his chair and walked to Mara. He pressed against her side, his small hand finding hers. Then he spoke, his voice thin from disuse, but clear. Don't go. It was only the third time she'd heard him speak, and it shattered every wall she had left. I won't, she promised. I'm staying for as long as you'll have me. The children relaxed visibly, the tension that had been coiling tighter all week finally releasing. Only Elias remained uncertain. I'm still angry, he said quietly, at everything. At Mama dying, at Crow, at how unfair everything is. That's okay, Mara said. You're allowed to be angry. But I don't want to be angry at you anymore. You didn't do anything wrong. You just... He stopped. You made things better, and I should have said thank you instead of acting like you were the enemy. You were protecting your mother's memory. That's not wrong either. Elias nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? Anything. If you and Papa, if you become more than just the cook, will you try to make us forget her? Never, Mara said fiercely. Never. Your mother was extraordinary. She built this family, this home, this life. I would never try to erase that or replace her. She searched for the right words. I'm just trying to help you carry her forward, to honor what she built by keeping it alive. The boy's eyes searched her face. Finally, he nodded. Okay, then I think... His voice cracked. I think maybe it's okay. You and Papa. Gideon pulled his son into another embrace. Thank you. For understanding. For being brave enough to say it. That night, after the children were finally in bed, Mara and Gideon stood on the porch watching stars wheel overhead. That was terrifying, Gideon said. Which part? The armed men or telling your children the truth? Both. All of it. He turned to face her. But I meant what I said. I care about you, Mara. I'm falling for you. And I don't know what that means or where it goes, but it means we take it one day at a time, Mara said. We survived tonight. That's enough for now. Is it? Because I want more than survival. I want... He stopped, uncertain. What do you want? Mara asked gently. Gideon looked at her, really looked, and his eyes were full of things he didn't know how to say. A future, he finally said, with you in it. If you want that too. Mara thought about the boarding house room she'd escaped, the kitchens that had rejected her, the lifetime of being told she was too much. Then she thought about Noah's small hand in hers, Sadie's hard-won trust, Lila's innocent question about enough room, and this man who looked at her like she was exactly right instead of too much. Yes, she said. I want that too. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and Mara felt something inside her chest crack open. Not breaking, but blooming. The part of her that had been locked away since James died, that had believed she'd never be loved again, never matter to anyone. She was wrong. She mattered here. When they finally pulled apart, Gideon rested his forehead against hers.
We still have to deal with Crow, he said quietly. Tonight was just a battle. The war's not over. I know. He'll come back. Probably worse than before. Let him. We won't be alone. Gideon pulled back to look at her. How are you so sure? Because for the first time we have something worth fighting for. Not just survival, not just the land, but a real future, a real family, a real life. Mara smiled. And that's worth any fight. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, blocking out the stars. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara wasn't afraid of the darkness. Because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. And neither was Gideon. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. That had to be enough. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for only weeks ago. And tonight, standing on this sagging porch in the cold mountain air, it felt like everything. The storm that had been threatening finally broke 3 days later, but it came from a direction none of them expected. Mara was kneading bread when Sadie burst through the kitchen door, her face flushed with excitement. There's a woman here, says she's from the territorial marshal's office. The woman waiting in the yard was small, compact, dressed in travel-worn clothes with a badge pinned to her vest. She couldn't have been more than 30, with sharp eyes that took in everything. Mr. Mercer, I'm Deputy Marshal Catherine Wade. I need to ask you some questions about Silas Crow. Gideon and Mara exchanged glances. What kind of questions? Gideon asked carefully. Wade pulled a folder from her saddlebag. The kind that involve a pattern of land acquisition that's gotten the territorial governor's attention. A banker in Stillwater named Hewitt came to me with records showing Crow's been manipulating property sales, falsifying debt records, forging signatures, threatening business owners. Hewitt? Gideon's voice was stunned. But he works for Crow. Not anymore. He grew a conscience. Wade's expression hardened. If what he says is true, Silas Crow is looking at federal charges. I need everything from you. Dates, incidents, witnesses. They spent hours going through it all. Every sabotaged fence, every stolen tool, every threat. When Wade finally closed her notebook, her face was grim. This is worse than I thought. Can you testify in front of a territorial judge? Yes, Gideon said without hesitation. Even if it makes you a target? He's already coming after us as hard as he can. At least this way we fight back. Over the next days, ranchers arrived to give statements. Henderson brought documentation of equipment theft. Richardson had records of sabotaged water rights. The Yates widow showed how Crow had manipulated her late husband's debts. The valley's secrets spilled out. Then, 3 nights later, Mara woke to the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire. Gideon! She screamed even as she ran toward the flames. The barn's burning! He burst from the house, the children behind him. The fire had taken hold too fast, burning too hot. This was Crow's final answer. The horses! Gideon shouted, running toward the barn door. It's too dangerous, Mara started, but he was already inside, disappearing into smoke and flame. John Henderson appeared with his sons. Let us help. They plunged into the barn after Gideon, emerging minutes later leading 3 panicked horses, coughing but alive. Then part of the roof collapsed inward. They fought the fire for 2 hours, but the barn was lost. By the time the flames died, Gideon stood staring at the ruins, his face black with soot. He did this, he said hoarsely. This is his retaliation. Papa! Lila's small voice cut through the anger. I saw them. 2 men. They ran from the barn and rode toward town. Wade appeared from the darkness. She'd been staying at Henderson's ranch. That's it. I'm making the arrest tonight. Before she could move, a rider appeared, one of Richardson's sons. Marshal Wade, Silas Crow is loading wagons. Looks like he's planning to run. Wade cursed. He knows I'm coming for him. She was already moving toward her horse. Henderson, come with me. Mercer, stay here with your family. Like hell, Gideon said. This is my fight too. He looked at his children. Elias, you're in charge. Keep everyone inside. Papa, don't go, Sadie begged. I have to, but I promise I'll come back. He kissed each child, then turned to Mara. Their eyes met. Be careful, she whispered. Always am. He kissed her quickly in front of everyone. Stay with them. Keep them safe. Then he was gone. Mara gathered the children into the house and waited. Dawn was breaking when they finally returned. We got him. Gideon's voice was rough with exhaustion and triumph. Wade arrested Silas Crow on charges of arson, fraud, intimidation, and about a dozen other things. He tried to run, but we blocked the road. He's in custody. And Lenora? Arrested too. She'd been keeping records of everyone her husband threatened. Wade thinks she was planning to use them herself, but they make perfect evidence. Over the following weeks, the valley transformed. With Crow gone, people who'd been silent for years started talking. Wade's investigation expanded to include incidents going back decades, and the Mercer Ranch slowly rebuilt. The barn raising happened on a cool October morning. Ranchers came from across the valley bringing lumber, nails, and labor. Mara cooked for 40 people, working alongside women who'd once crossed the street to avoid her. By sunset, the barn's frame stood solid and true. That night, Gideon found Mara on the porch. "I have something for you." He handed her a package. Inside was a new leather apron, beautifully crafted, sized to fit her exactly, with her initials stitched into the pocket. "The old one's barely holding together," Gideon said. "I wanted you to have something that was yours, not borrowed, not temporary." He took a breath. "There's more. I don't want you to just be the cook anymore. I want you to be my wife. If you'll have me." Mara looked at this man who'd learned to fight again, to love again. "Your children." "I already asked them, all of them, even Elias. They said yes. They want you to stay as family." His voice was soft. "I'm not asking you to replace Elizabeth. I'm asking you to build something new with us, something that honors what she started but belongs to all of us." "Yes," Mara said. "Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding happened in November beside the rebuilt barn. The children stood with them. When it came time to speak, Gideon's voice broke. "Mara taught me that loving again doesn't mean forgetting. It means having the courage to build something new on the foundation of what came before." Mara's words were simpler. "I spent my whole life being told I was too much. This family taught me that I was never too much. I was just waiting for people who had enough room in their hearts for all of me." The winter that followed was hard, but different. The barn was full of hay. The children were warm and fed, and on cold nights they sat by the fire being a family. Noah spoke more now. Elias taught Mara to ride. The twins declared her the best cook in the territory. Lila drew pictures where Mara was always largest, taking up space without apology. And Sadie learned to be 13 again instead of a substitute mother. In March, word came that Silas Crow had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years. Lenora had turned witness against him, then moved east where no one knew her name. The valley healed. One spring evening, Mara stood in the kitchen that was now truly hers, surrounded by children doing homework while Gideon worked on the books. "Mama?" Lila's voice was tentative. "Can you help me with my letters?" Mara wiped flour from her hands and moved to help. In that moment, surrounded by children who'd claimed her, married to a man who loved her without asking her to shrink, she understood something profound. She'd spent 43 years learning to apologize for existing. All of that had been a lie. She was enough exactly as she was. That night, she hung the new apron beside the old one James had made. "You're keeping both?" Gideon asked. "Both matter. James loved me when I'd forgotten how to love myself. You taught me I could love again. I'm not choosing between past and present. I'm honoring both." Elizabeth would approve of that. Smart woman. She was. So are you. He pulled her close. "Thank you for teaching us that love doesn't run out just because you've lost someone, that there's always room for more if you're brave enough to make it." Years later, when grandchildren played in the yard and the rebuilt barn stood strong, people told stories about the valley's transformation. But in the Mercer household, they told a different story. They told the story of Mara Holloway, who'd spent a lifetime being told she was too much, and who finally found a family with enough room for all of her. In the kitchen, beneath 2 hanging aprons, Elias had carved words into the beam. Enough room. Because Mara had taught them all that the world doesn't decide how much space you deserve. You do. And from the day she chose to stay and fight, she never apologized for her place in the world again. She'd found her people, her home, and she taught everyone around her that the bravest thing you can do is claim the space you deserve and refuse to shrink for anyone. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, but something better, something real. A life built on grief and courage and stubborn hope.
and the radical belief that there's always enough room for love if you're brave enough to make it. And in the end, that was everything.